Commissioner Richardson, and Commissioner Fernandez is our alternate. I'm not sure if he's on, but I'm told that our colleague Commissioner Minor is participating via Zoom. Colleagues, staff, do I have any requests for deferrals or items to be taken out of order? I have not been informed of any.
I don't have any for deferral, Commissioner.
I have one, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Minor would like to defer item 15.
Okay, we will defer item 15. Thank you, Commissioner Minor. Although we have a pretty busy agenda, we don't have a packed house here. So what I'd like to do is maybe take up some items that staff is here for, so I can dismiss you and you can get back to the business of taking care of our residents. Okay. Would you like to go first? What item are you here for?
Item 7.
Item 7. Okay. This item is to discuss short-term flooding solutions in areas susceptible to flooding with no forthcoming infrastructure projects. Commissioner Samuelin,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And we all know that flooding is a major issue for the city and that we have an important program that we all support to continue to address longer-term solutions. Now, that program is going to take a while. And there are many neighborhoods that won't be addressed for a long time. When we initially passed this referral and we had our first discussion, we wanted to focus on hotspots, areas that flood today but aren't getting the fix anytime soon. And I think the administration has done a very fine job at putting some new ideas together. I think we have some things in front of us that are well worth the conversation, and I will turn it over to our team.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Chairman Ariola, Vice Chairman Samuelin, and Commissioner Richardson. Joe Gomez, Director of Public Works. Thank you for this opportunity. PJ, if you would. Excellent. So today we're here to talk a little bit about interim flooding solutions. If you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, please. So we're going to give you a little bit of background, and then I'm going to turn the presentation over to our city engineer, Cristina Ortega, to go over the meat and potatoes of the presentation, and then our recommendations, and we're happy to address any questions you have. Next. So first and foremost, at the outset, we are wholly committed to our neighborhood improvement program. We know it's an incredibly important program for the city, so I want to stress that. The idea here is that as Vice Chairman Samuelin said, there are areas in the city that are susceptible to flooding, and we know that some of these areas are way out in terms of the priorities in the neighborhood improvement program. So we want to be sure that we address or provide some sort of interim relief, if you will. The neighborhood improvement program, as you know, is two major components: rainfall induced flooding, obviously it addresses those, and then tidal flooding, sunny day flooding. The solutions we're going to present to you today do not they address some measure of relief in terms of flooding. They will not address tidal flooding. They will not address a sea level rise. So I want to be absolutely clear on those. And then we did evaluate a series of areas, and then Christina will go into the content of the presentation throughout the city to determine and create a heat map. So with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Christina.
Thank you, Joe. Good morning, all. Cristina Ortega, City Engineer. If we could go to the next slide, please. So just a brief overview of what the staff worked on to come to the recommendations. We looked at flooding complaints throughout the city over the past couple of years. And based on that and looking at the density of those complaints and the issues, we came up with that hotspot flooding map that you see there on the screen. Next slide, please. We went through a process where we removed those areas that are either currently under construction with projects to address flooding issues, or the neighborhood improvement projects that are forthcoming. So we took those out of the evaluation, and we looked at an inverse prioritized list of those neighborhood improvement projects. and also looked at the density of the complaints. Next slide, please. To come up with the list of hotspots and the prioritized list. Our evaluation focused on the top 10 areas identified. And as you see up on the screen, Nautilus D as well as Lagos A were the top 2 identified areas. Those 2 are number 49 and number 48 on the priority list of neighborhood improvement projects. And you can see, from there on, those hotspot areas that we looked at that we can possibly provide some sort of interim relief. Next. I think it's important to stress this point, which Joe mentioned earlier, that the solutions that we're presenting here today are interim in nature. They address significantly smaller storms that our city's stormwater program. And what you see up there is a comparison of, obviously, the city stormwater program addresses the 8.75 inches in 24 hours with very high tides. For comparison, the alternatives that we looked at are significantly smaller storms during low tide condition, if you would. Next. What we see up on the screen are pictures that show flooding in the top 2 areas. As an example, Nautilus D, we show part of the hotspot area. On the left side, we have inlets on the road, and you see the street relatively dry during that rainstorm. But on the right side of the road, there's no inlets, and we figure that by adding this infrastructure, that relatively smaller investment, we could provide that interim relief to that area. We also see Lagos A, where again these so through a significant flooding event, significant rainfall, but identifying those top 2. Next. Here you can see just a section view, a rendering of what that slight flooding scenario looks like. And the next couple slides are going to show our proposed solutions for these areas. Next. So we're proposing inlets to collect that stored or ponding water off the street and sidewalks, and connecting it to existing systems. That was option 1 that we looked at. That is to connect to an already overwhelmed system. And this is why we're looking at option 2, which is going to be our recommendation to move forward with, where we're also adding injection wells to 1, slightly increased capacity, and 2, for added water quality benefits, which we believe is going to be a requirement from the regulators to address. Next. So up on the screen again, we see some images that showing our very conceptual design, showing extension of conveyance pipes and inlets for option 1. And next slide will show option 2. This is for Lagos, our top identified area, where we're also proposing a couple injection wells to assist in the capacity and water quality. Next. So up on the screen here, we have our 2 options that we consider. Our team developed these very conceptual designs and came up with estimated high-level estimates for the top 10. It's important to say this is for the top 10 areas.
These are total numbers for the top 10? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Correct. Yes, sir. And looking at, I've mentioned a little bit of the advantages and disadvantages associated with the 2. The greater cost associated with option 2, which is the one that we're recommending, is because we're proposing to add those injection wells. But then again, that also provides added capacity, like ever so slightly in comparison to our program, stormwater program, if you would, but also the water quality component, which may very well be an absolute requirement from the regulators. And in general, that's what we're striving to provide improved water quality to the community in general. Some of the disadvantages, again, stressing that this absolutely does not address sunny day tidal flooding, because these are low-lying areas, and when we have those king tides, they will continue to flood as they do today.
Can
And
I
also-
interrupt you?
Yes, sir.
To that last point about sunny day flooding, I think I know the answer, but let's just go through it. What could we do to avoid that? In addition to all this, what is the missing element to get around sunny day flooding?
Road raising.
Yeah, okay. And that's the controversial issue for some of us is we know that the streets flood, we see it, it's visible, it's not an existential issue, it's an issue today in 2022. Most experts say that it's only going to get worse. So the only way around that, in your professional opinion, in addition to everything we're doing here, is road raising.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? Let me ask a question, because we were talking about Lagos. I was in that area maybe 2 months ago, and a homeowner came out, and I was the elected official on site at that little park. And she was very unhappy with the city, and I was the beneficiary of her expression.
I got it too, by the way.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I just give them your number. Somebody.
That's
has a
right.
gripe, I just say,
You were there
"Oh, Mr.
too,
Rich
Commissioner
Fernandez."
Thank you for joining me for participating in that discussion. She was quite angry. So, and I said, well, I don't know anything about it. Let me check into it. I get back, we start doing research, my aide and I, and I found out that there was a resiliency project slated for that neighborhood, but it was so controversial that many people didn't want it. So the commission, I actually found the video, the commission killed the project. And so how are we going to handle those situations? Because clearly there's a need in that community, and there are some people that want it and some people that don't. So because you've just given us some ideas and so forth, but I think that was presented probably in 18 or 19, and it was all killed. So here we are in 22 having the same conversation. What do we do in that case?
That's that.
Why don't I take it? I mean, it's political will, right? So that I think we're talking about the same project. That was literally the first project that we killed following this administration's public policy that they ran on for the pause almost 6 years ago. That's what started this. And in those 6 years, we've done nothing because it was supposed to be a pause. It's kind of like 2 weeks to flatten the curve. 2 years later, we're still here. So it takes political will. So unless we have the votes, nothing's going to happen.
Mr. Chair, if I may, and I know we're a little off topic, but it's important because I think everything we're talking about today is not related to our neighborhood improvement projects. That's going anyway. So this is an and. So I just want to be clear about that. I would just say for the record that there were significant, in my opinion, and I was in the dais at the time, legitimate community concerns about that proposal, including the loss of trees, including the risks to private property, the lack of support from many in the community, $70 million order of magnitude RFP, and by memory was rejected 5-2. And I voted in the majority, and I fully stand by that vote.
So like I said, political will. We have to be able to vote for it, or for those residents who don't like our policy, they're going to have to get new commissioners that are willing to move forward. Otherwise, we're going to be where we've been for the past 6 years, which is nowhere. And those are facts. I mean, challenge the facts. Those are the facts.
So if I could just follow. So going back, you're talking about Lagos here, but conversations already been had. What's different today? How are you going to do anything there?
Again, Commissioner, I think the important thing to stress here is that what we're proposing here today does not replace the neighborhood improvement program or a project. We know that Lagos, the neighborhood, like many other neighborhoods, need this improvement. We need to raise the roads. We need to address sea level rise. Notwithstanding, there's still flooding issues that we have with normal storms and all that stuff. And we're trying to find at least a medium, if you will, of trying to address some of those areas that consistently we have a lot of complaints on where we get in the control room. So we went through, and when we analyzed, like Christina said, 2 years of complaints. And so these areas are hotspots in terms of complaints. So what this will do is it'll provide a level of relief, but certainly will not address the long-term issue, which is sea level rise. That's not going to be addressed by this. And we want to stress
my
that.
concern is running around the city and trying to put Band-Aids on little spots is not the most efficient way to spend money, right? Because you were really just hitting spots, and then we're going to have to come back at some point and really do the real project.
No doubt, sir. Absolutely.
Yeah. Were you getting close to wrapping or?
Yeah, actually, we
okay.
have one more,
Yeah, no, that's
Uh,
fine. I just want to.
one more slide that.
The
that
next
shows
slide, next
the
slide, please.
It shows our proposed implementation plan for these top 10 areas stretched over a course of 6 years. And again, you can see there broken down by area what the estimated cost would be for each of these.
Yeah. Let me dive in. And again, I think this has been well thought out. Couple things I would just offer up. First, these are areas that we now have a fact base, have complaints and are flooding. Just to pick a couple like City Center A or Nautilus, when would they get the neighborhood project? Ballpark, what year should they have to wait if we were doing the major project there?
At this point, we don't have an approved plan that lays out the timeline for all of those.
Right.
I can say for certain, City Center A, for example, is number 29.
So there are 28
City-
other, so we're gonna finish west, because we will get there. We're gonna then go south the 5th. North Beach Town Center, I think, is coming. So
Correct.
we gotta click through 3, check off 25 more, and then we'll do something about City Center. Right? So that sounds like a long time. I don't know what decade that will be, but that does sound like a long time. And also, one of the reasons I like option 2, colleagues, is I believe it's recommended, is the way the administration is proposing it with the injection wells is infrastructure that would be part of a longer term project. So it's not necessarily quote unquote throwaway. It's something that we're going to build on. Is that correct?
Not all of it
Right.
would be throwaway. The wells, as we say, we use those as part of the
Right.
neighborhood improvement projects to provide that water quality component that's required to address the first 1.5 inches of rainfall. So that is correct.
So, colleagues, to me, I believe we've got areas that are flooding. We have projects in areas that will not be addressed for decades. We have a parallel path. We're going to continue the projects that we have talked about, the ones that we can do. And this allows us to address areas that are flooding. So I am supportive of what the administration has put forward with option 2. I believe per the memo, there's $5 million, which looks like it could handle 2 projects. I would like to have some validation from the neighborhood that it works, they want it, and if they didn't want it, we'd take it somewhere else. And I don't see any reason, if it is the will of this body, that we can start right away, because there is funding in the bank through the Resiliency Fund for 2 of them. We could then evaluate. So I'm prepared to accept the administration's recommendation and proceed with 2.
Mr. Chair. And I'm very supportive of this. And I'm also very mindful of the fact that from the moment that a decision is made, it takes 6 years to the point of construction and delivery of this to the residents of that area. And it's it kind of reminds us that of we can't delay decisions and that it takes a long time to go through construction, through design and through everything with these projects. What I would like to say is that for as much as I like this, and I think we should be doing this because there are projects that, are just on the bottom of the list that should get some temporary relief under flooding, that the residents of that area do realize and that we do a robust education and informative campaign for them to understand the difference between what we're doing here versus the long-term issues to address, like the tidal flooding, which is the real threat to property and to our economy here in Miami Beach, which I'm very concerned about. So in doing this, I think we just have to be very clear and very informative, educational towards the residents of that area in the difference, so that they realize that this is not the final product, but just a temporary relief.
So Commissioner Samuelson spoke about this as a recommendation of the administration. So is this a proposal that you put forward, or would you prefer to do entire projects at a time?
If anything, with the 5 million, we can proceed with Nautilus D and Lagos A. We would actually have to acquire the additional funding for the. That's why we laid it out over 6 years, Commissioner Richardson, because obviously it's going to take some time to be able to get the additional funding. But I think in reality, the first two, Nautilus D and Lagos A, are the ones that have the significant amount of complaints. We do have some resiliency funding available. I think it would be, if anything, it would be a great pilot program to be able to see the effectiveness of this.
And tell me where this funding is coming from, because I wasn't aware that we had any available funds at this point.
Yes, sir. The Resiliency Fund is based on the additional funding that we received for the seawall program, which is based on resiliency funding. We already have $10 million of that already slotted, and we are proceeding forward with seawall construction projects that this committee approved and the commission approved. So we're proceeding forward. That additional available fund, we would move to these two projects, and then at such time in the future when we receive additional funding, we can continue on with our seawall program and replace those funds.
And have you talked to our CFO? Because I thought the last resiliency funds that we had, we earmarked for the town center area. So is this something in addition to that?
Yes, sir.
And you've coordinated with the CFO and confirmed that these funds are available?
Yes, sir, we have.
And just to be clear, what we haven't coordinated and, awaiting approval for is, transferring that from the
Correct.
seawalls
Obviously,
into.
because we wanted to make sure that the
Yes.
committee approved it.
So I'm going to ask can we defer the item long enough for me to get the CFO? And I want to hear from the CFO on this.
No, I would love to, if there are questions from our CFO, is it possible that we could hear from him? Because I think we have something that is sort of ready to go. There's money in the bank. I don't want to delay this conversation, but if John might be available for a quick acknowledgement. Yeah.
I'm asking.
I mean, if I'm hearing the team here correctly, you're recommending option 2, but given your druthers, you would recommend option 2 plus the road raising.
It's the road raising will also include major drainage improvements, Commissioner. So again, this again is interim. It won't replace the road raising. We are obviously committed to the neighborhood improvement program, and we certainly want to proceed forward with all of these neighborhood improvement projects.
Here's my big concern is that we're going to spend the money twice, now in the next decade or so for the neighborhood improvement programs as we get to different neighborhoods. And then in 20 or 30 years, we're going to have to do it again because we're not going to actually solve the real problem of street flooding. So those neighborhoods will have, not only are taxpayers going to pay twice, but then those neighborhoods will have to suffer through construction twice. That's the issue. Do you do it once the right way, or do you put a Band-Aid and kind of head fake the neighborhood that, hey, we're here to help, but actually not really?
Commissioner, we had our druthers. Obviously, the neighborhood improvement project would be the ideal solution and to complete it. But again, we're trying to be realistic that we know that some of these neighborhood improvement projects are way out there. And in terms of funding, we may not have available funding for decades. So we want to be sure that at least we try to address some of these issues that are persistently a problem for the community. And we get a lot of complaints. So,
You know, I'm not going to support it. And here's why. Because it's while it will help on the margins, it doesn't solve the long-term problem. We're spending taxpayer dollars twice, and we'll make these neighborhoods suffer twice in the coming decades. So I think I'm going to be a firm no, until we have the political will to do what's right. And if it doesn't happen during my tenure, hopefully a future commission will do it right and do what is needed to preserve the long-term health of our city. So I don't want to do something that actually doesn't work and just waste taxpayer money. So if we're at a standstill until we get a commission or residents get so fed up that they toss us out of office and bring in a commission and a mayor who wants to actually tackle this issue, then so be it. But I'm not going to support something that just wastes taxpayer money and is just putting lipstick on a problem and not really addressing it.
Point of information, Mr. Chair, just so that I know, and maybe it was referenced and I missed it. So for example, priority 1 project for the NIP, what would be the delivery date, the projected delivery date?
we have no projected delivery date for priority 1 and 2, which is not on this deal, of course. They are, in terms of priorities, they are number 49 and number 48 out of 52 or 56 total neighborhoods. So, which means that right now we are working on we just started First Street. We're going to be going to North Beach Town Center. So there's potentially 40 some odd of neighborhoods ahead of this.
But as a professional that works in this, if you had to estimate, what would you believe would be the delivery date on the
Commissioner,
NIP?
a lot of that is tied to funding. So if in a perfect world, if funds were available, it would still take several years, because obviously we can't have the whole city under construction.
But several years is this is 6 years out. I mean,
Yes,
we're not
but it's
talking
6
several
years for the entire the 10 top 10. In other words, it's not 6 years to implement the first 2. I just want to be clear. The 6-year period that we proposed is for the top 10 priorities. We split them up in tranches of 2, essentially. So again, to answer your question, even if in a perfect world, if we had all the funding available for these neighborhoods, it would still be at least over a decade, in my opinion, because they 49 and 48.
At least over a decade. But this would provide temporary relief in that event.
Yes, sir. Some measure of relief, yes. Localized. And again, let me stress again, if you saw on the map, the areas, the problem areas that, again, consistently, we receive a lot of complaints. We looked at complaints over the past 2 years, and again, it would address those localized areas. It wouldn't address the entire neighborhood. And I want to be clear about that also. This does not address the entire neighborhood.
Let me, Commissioner Fernandez, are you?
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay.
Those are my questions.
So, and that was where my questions were going, and I think the chair mentioned the concerns as well. So if the commission, this body, 3 or 4 years ago, before voted to kill, this project would have been done, but started, but it was killed.
Yes, sir.
And it could have been done correctly. The entire project could have been done. But now what we're doing is talking about putting a Band-Aid on the situation. And I worry about wasting taxpayer dollars, because we're going to put a Band-Aid on it. And then at some point, the reason it's number 47 or 48, it was number 1. And it got moved to the end of the line because the community said, we don't want it. And so if the community doesn't want it, it was the will of the body to move to another community, right? But now here we are talking about putting a Band-Aid on something that was voted down by the commission. And I just think it's a waste of taxpayer dollars. If we're not going to do the project right, why are we doing the project? And if certain communities don't want this work, then we should move to other communities, because there are communities that want the work. Do we have any idea how much the entire project would cost for, say, Lagos, for example? How much, was that a 50 or a $70 million project?
I'm gonna have to defer. Eric, I think you probably have some history on that.
At the time, I believe it was between 90 and 100 million. And
And
it
so
was
this
all
is-
of Upper North Bay Road, Pine Tree Circle, and the Lakeview neighborhood.
Yeah. And this is just, what is this going to be? To put some walls in front of some homes, or what would this be?
Oh, no, sir. This is, it's all underground work. So the injection well will be on the ground with a couple of inlets to be able to collect the water. So on the surface, you're really not going to see it. Once it's done, it's finished. But again, it's a localized area to improve the.
And where would you put the injection wells? In front or near the homes that are having the most difficulty, or what would you do?
The location of the injection well will be based on where we're going to put the inlets to be able to collect that water and treatment. Typically, we'll put that in the middle, obviously on the ground in the street.
Yeah. John, can you help us to understand? I'm hearing that there are funds available, and I thought that we had already earmarked all the resiliency funds. So tell me where I think this $5 million is available. What money is that?
I'd have to double check everything. Okay, so I just came on the fly here, but we have some limited funds to do some limited improvements that are not related to the greater neighborhood improvement projects, which, as you know very well, are very expensive, take a lot of money, and more than likely usually trigger rate increases in order to be able to fund the bonds associated with them. So this is very limited. This is, it's going to hopefully make some difference to some hotspots, I guess, is one way to think about it. But it's certainly not the long-term solution. I think somebody called it a Band-Aid. That's probably a good way to think about it.
So but do you know, and listen, I apologize because we have put you on the spot. I literally sent you a message and said, could you please come to the chamber? So thank you. And if you don't have the answer, I tell it, but where is this $5 million coming from? Do we know?
I can probably find out in the next 5 minutes.
Okay. Well, if you can do that, I tell you what, I'm, and I don't know if you're looking to try to move this, Commissioner Samuelin, or what your intent is. What I would be open to is having this a consideration as part of our budget cycle this year, so that we started already working on the budget. I think John had departments already working on this, and I want to see how this is going to fit into the overall budget. And if we can do a couple of these pilot projects, even though I am very much against doing the Band-Aid approach, but as we heard, maybe having a couple of pilot programs would give us some additional information. But I want to see how this is going to fit into the overall budget, because we've got Town Center, we've already started. We've got 10 million. We just got a grant from the state. The other opportunity I think we should look at is there's all sorts of resiliency money available, additional money coming from the state. And we should look at whether or not there is a grant opportunity to do this work rather than spending our funds locally, because we may be able to get state grant money to do a pilot program and share the results with the state. So that's kind of where I'm at on this right now. And so I can't support spending $5 million today, but I would certainly be open-minded to considering as part of the budget cycle. And I would be even more open to the idea of trying to get a state grant to do the work.
Come on up. Commissioner, let me ask you, where is this coming from? Is this coming because the neighborhood association approached you about this?
This is coming from the greatest current threat we have as it relates to resiliency, in my opinion, is we got flooded streets. That's what's happening now. We can argue and debate the pace of sea level rise. We can talk about all the challenges that we have as it relates to infrastructure. We have water on the streets. We are getting complaints. And so this is coming from the needs of our community, that let me be clear, not a say if it's the 40 some odd project, that's decades away, gentlemen. They're just not going to get any relief. And LaGorce, they're not going to get anything for years. This is in parallel to pursuing our neighborhood project, trying to help neighborhoods. And Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, because this was the recommendation of the administration to proceed in this manner. And what I've tailored it to, colleagues, is a pilot of $5 million, which I believe I was told and the memo indicates is in the bank. That's not correct. That would be new information. But there's $5 million that we have. Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, didn't you and Christina actually do a fact-based analysis of where there are complaints and issues?
Yes, sir.
Could you expand on that, please?
Yeah, if we can, PJ, can you put I think it's slide number 4 up, please? No, keep going back, please. Couple more. There we go. Yes, so the way the analysis was done is we went back historically 2 years and looked at all different kinds of complaints that we received. Those complaints are logged typically in through the control room or our infrastructure operations center picks up those, and where we typically go out and address whether it's to clean an inlet or whatever. So the analysis was based on logged complaints. And Christina, you know the number, but I mean, there was a significant number of total complaints that, you know, that we reviewed over our 2-year period.
Yes, it's pretty significant, and you know, it's hard to see up on the
Yeah, I
slide.
can't read it in
Yes,
the,
it's difficult to read,
the
but
binder up
you
there.
know, we can see complaints for standing water, you know, up to 3 inches in the order of 500, 3 to 6 inches in the other order of 300.
Complaints, by the way.
Complaints. These are a
Complaints.
number of
Complaints.
pinpointed complaints.
People that formally
So,
complain.
yeah, and so can I just, if I may,
Please.
and then I will yield to Commissioner Richardson. And just to be clear, this is not the $90 million neighborhood improvement project. We're not talking about that, because I would suggest that these neighborhoods, at the pace that we anticipate, it could be decades before we get there. We don't have anything else to address this. And in your professional opinion, will this help them? Will they be better off? Will you get less complaints?
It will certainly help that area that's identified, for example, Nautilus A, Nautilus D, LaGorce A, that particular area that we're identifying, it will certainly help relieve some of that, the storms that we get during the summertime in South Florida. It will not solve the long-term issue. And I want to be absolutely clear about that.
And if I
Understood.
may add, in some instances, I think the way that we put it is that you're still going to be seeing flooding in these areas, but perhaps the duration of that standing water may be reduced to some extent, depending on, you know, what the project and the specific area to be addressed.
I just want to make a comment. For as long as this is not in lieu of anything that's been planned in terms of road racing, I'm supportive of this. For as long, and maybe, and I see the chair, and I think he feels I might be a little bit naive on this, but for me, I think it's just clear. There are people who get affected by the flooding. It affects traffic. It affects people's quality of life. It affects their property with these rainstorms. And we have to be very clear. This is for rainstorm. This is not for high tides or long-term issues. This is just to address temporary rainstorm issues for projects that otherwise these residents would have to wait decades to get a solution for. So for as long as this is not in lieu of the real long-term solutions that the science has indicated for us, and we can provide that temporary relief if the funding exists, I'm open to that.
And I want to be crystal clear about it. This does not replace the neighborhood improvement program. This is just again, an interim solution to localized flooding. That's all it's doing. And that localized flooding is to a certain degree only.
Yeah, I mean,
So I want to be absolutely clear about that.
yeah, so thank you. Thank you for couching your language. We're putting you in a difficult spot, but I mean, reading between the lines, I think you're measuring your words wisely, but I think if, you know, it's not a stretch to read between the lines. And, you know, this is a soft recommendation when someone's saying that this is going to provide interim relief, some relief, not provide, you know, long-term relief. You know, I think we got to be very cautious about spending millions of dollars of taxpayer money on something that, you know, might have some minor effect, because we have limited funds and we have to put those funds to best use throughout the city. You know, the tragedy of all this is, had we gone forward back in January of 2018, this project would have been done by now, and that we would have solved this for decades to come and generations to come. But we punted on that and we kicked it down the road. And then we basically adopted a policy that if you don't want the neighborhood improvement plan, including road raising, fine, we'll move on to the neighborhoods that do welcome it, and you'll just go somewhere else in line. And then, wow, look, 4 years later, the neighborhood's complaining about flooding. And, you know, and again, we let the tyranny of the minority dictate what we do as policymakers. And that's not the way you implement policy for an entire city. You know, you're going to always have people that object or have concerns. It's our job to help them understand what we're trying to do and get them comfortable. And if we can't get them there, but we believe that in the long-term best interest of the city, adopting a certain policy is the way to go, we have to be comfortable knowing that there are going to be some people that are upset with us. But that's not the way many of the folks on this body legislate. They allow the tyranny of the minority just to shut down the city. And I'm not okay with that. I'm not going to play that game. So I'm not going to be supportive of this, because I think it's misleading to the public and it's a waste of taxpayer dollars. So either we go all in and do it right, or, you know, you're going to have to get the votes somewhere else. I'm not going to play this game.
Yeah. Mr. Chair, if I may.
And also, like, we do have to move on. We've been at this for now 50 minutes.
Sure.
And we've got 17 items on the agenda. So I think two of us are not leaning in this direction. Two are, we can send it to the full commission for further debate.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I could, and I do want to hear the question that my colleague raised about the $5 million. But Mr. Chair, City Center A, number 9, was not part of any proposal. They didn't do anything. They didn't have a chance. There's no solution. They're getting requests. They're going to keep flooding. What are we going to tell them?
What I just said, let's do it right. I mean, look, I live in
Well,
Sunset
what
Harbor.
decade? What decade do you want to do it right?
We can move them up if we do what the team of expert consultants, you love to say that you want to listen to the experts.
Mhm.
Every expert that we've hired, and there's been a colossal amount of experts hired over the last several years, and tens of millions of dollars spent on these experts, they all tell us the same thing: raise the roads as part of your solution. So, you know, unless that's part of the solution, we're going to be misleading the public that we're addressing the issue, and we're going to be wasting taxpayer dollars.
But it was always clear, Mr. Chair, it was always clear that this is not in lieu of that program. That program is on its own path. This is the recommendation, and we like to accept professional recommendations when they're given, of what we do in the interim, because this is not replacing. And I think we've now said that a bunch of times. I know we want to move on. John, in the memo here, I just want to clarify, because what I was recommending is a pilot, and I do want to see if there are additional funds out there. I love the grant idea, and if we could go after it, but I'm just reading in the memo, the administration's recommending the implementation of option 2. It was a $26 million ask. I'm not asking for that. I'd say let's do 2 and see how we do. That's $5 million. And it says $5 million of which may be used from Resilience Fund. John, is that accurate?
Okay, my understanding of this is that there was $10 million of additional seawall funding from Resiliency Funds last year. You may recall that we went through the Resiliency Fund. We tried to see how much money's left in there. We allocated it in different ways. And so that 10 million is in addition to the GEO bond funding for the seawalls. So what this discussion would be to repurpose 5 million of that seawall money. And the reason why potentially available is that we have enough seawall money for the foreseeable future to do all the things we need to do in the next probably 7 to 10 years,
Yes.
right? So in theory, if this is a higher priority, we would basically reprioritize and move this 5 million over to be available for this program. And I would like to add that there is going to be a lot of discussion this budget cycle about potential rate increases in stormwater needed for, and water and sewer needed for the North Beach Town Center project, which is a neighborhood improvement project, essentially. So, you know, this item might, you know, you may want to consider as part of a holistic picture as we get into the budget cycle.
Okay, well, colleagues, we can move on then, because what I just heard is we had some additional funding. We're not spending it for 7 to 10 years. There's $5 million of funding. We have neighborhoods that are flooding today. So if it's not the will of this body, I sure hope it would, because otherwise we're telling these neighborhoods we don't have an answer for you. I think we should spend the 5 million. I would ask that we move this to the full commission, because I think with $5 million there, and neighborhoods flooding today, you know, with no other good answer, I believe we owe it to them, and I'd like to have the full commission vote.
Let me, you know, Commissioner Samuelin, it's really unfair that the way you're presenting this, quite frankly, because, you know, you're saying there are complaints and we're not doing anything about it. There were complaints 4 or 5 years ago, and you voted against the project. We had a project, let me finish. We had a project that was before the community. We wanted to move forward to fix the problems. And there were, you just said earlier, there were 5 of you, including yourself, that voted against the project. And so now you're saying, let's fix the project. We had an opportunity 4 or 5 years ago to fix the project. And so now, and I realize, staff, you're being put in a very difficult situation. And as Chair says, you know, to pick your words carefully, and an interim solution is a euphemism for Band-Aid. That's what it is. It's a Band-Aid. So the question is, if we find $5 million, what do we do with the $5 million? Would the $5 million be better spent to do a real project rather than put a Band-Aid on something? You know, you know, we could put a Band-Aid on something and none of us will be here in 20 years. We'll be gone and the Band-Aid and the money will be spent. But what about we reprioritize the project? I'm perfectly happy to take this item for Lagos and move from number 47 to number 1. Let's move it up right after Town Center. We're working on West Avenue. We're working on south of 5th. We're working on Town Center area and the 72nd Street. I would be prepared today to vote to move this to the next project, and let's put it back. And let's do that rather than spend and we'll take that $5 million and we'll put it towards this project and we'll do it right. That's what I'm prepared to support.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to respond because my name was called out. First off, what's on the table for Lagos here is 2 plus 5. That sounds like 7 million. And the project that was on the table is $100 million. So that seems like apples and oranges. Nautilus A, B, and D were not proposed as part of that project. They were not going to be addressed. They weren't even in the scope of the project. And poor City Center A, they never got included. These projects weren't voted on. So to compare a $100 million or $7 million project, Commissioner Richardson, that doesn't seem fair. That doesn't seem fair. And to tell neighborhoods that are flooding today, where we know for decades they're not going to get anything because of politics, that you don't want to provide them relief, that doesn't seem fair to me. Please, let's move it to the full commission, because now I don't think this is a productive conversation.
Well, I want to respond to that. So first of all, the $100 million project or $90 million project is much larger geography than a few injection wells, and that are going to be spot treatment. So you can't compare the apples to oranges. But the fact is that this commission had a solution for that community 4 or 5 years ago. And it was the will of the body to kill it because there were some people that were concerned about moving forward. So, you know, you did not support that then. You want to put a Band-Aid on it today. And I don't think that that's the best way to spend taxpayer dollars.
May I, Mr. Chair? Yeah. If this makes it to commission from here, what I would like to see is I was not here when the NIP was voted on. I would like to see option 2 and next to option 2 reprioritize, so that then we can take both under consideration and see what we would like to make as our final decision on that. Is that possible?
Well, let me ask a question of our CFO, because I think your recommendation is personally wise counsel, which is, we have a limited number of, capital dollars to spend, and we have to figure out a way to finance it. I do think the appropriate way to look at this is the entire package through the budget cycle, and then decide, how much money we have available, what type of rate increases would be required, the timing of that, and then start looking at all of the projects that we need to fund rather than doing it piecemeal. Would you agree with that as the right fiscally?
I agree that this is very important work, that we have a lot of different hard policy decisions to make, that there's very limited funds. And so for me, my recommendation would be to have a holistic discussion on it, whether that's a workshop or as part of the budget cycle. I just think it merits that level.
We're heading into the budget cycle. I think we start in May.
Yeah, we'll have the budget retreat in May, and that's an opportunity to have a discussion there.
I would strongly urge us to wait.
I would
till-
move
till
that
May.
this item be considered as part of the annual budget cycle as we continue. That's my motion.
And I would second that as if we're going to send a recommendation to the full commission, that we just do it. It's only 2 more months. John, just refresh my recollection if you remember. I remember the sort of I'm not going to use the word compromise because that's not the right word, but when we killed this project, the North Bay Road project 4 years ago, I think what we did sort of as a token, we invested, I think it was about $800,000 or $900,000 in bioswales for that area. Does that sound about right?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is the patchwork that we do. Like we invested $900,000 in bioswales in that area, and we're still getting complaints of flooding. So these are little Band-Aids that we do that don't address the problem. So that's hey, it's $5 million, not $100 million, but it doesn't really do much, right? So just like the bioswales don't do a much, but it's real money and it adds up. So I firmly believe we need to do this right. I live in the Sunset Harbor neighborhood, which flooded all the time. It's not disputable. We raised the roads among other critical infrastructure projects there. And the thing is bone dry. We don't have any problems. Everybody's happy. The stores are happy. The residents are happy. It works. We know there are things that in hindsight we could have done better in the Palm Hibiscus Island. Those are learning opportunities. We've always said that we're going to go through this through iterations. We're going to make mistakes, but we're going to get a lot of things right. That doesn't mean that we stop trying to address the issue because we might make mistakes. We're going to make mistakes and we're going to learn from them. I mean, the Palm and Hibiscus Islands, last I checked, the past 2 years, those real estate values have soared. So if it was a real problem, that wouldn't be happening. Okay. We're on a path to fix the things we need to fix there. And I don't think we're ever going to have that problem there again. So, this concern about raising roads, I think is being overhyped, possibly for political reasons, but it's being overhyped because we know it worked very well in the Sunset Harbor neighborhood. And judging from how the market has reacted to the Palm Hibiscus neighborhoods, people want to live there really badly.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say to that point, when you're doing something that really no one else in the world is doing, you're going to make some mistakes, and we're going to learn, and we're going to improve upon the methods along with our consultants and so forth. But even though Palm and Hibiscus, it was a difficult project and there were lots of issues on harmonization, I'd say for the most part, I get no complaints anymore. People are happy. It was a successful project. Sunset Harbor was a successful project. We want to make West Avenue a successful project. So I just feel strongly that if we're going to do these projects, let's do them right. Let's not do the Band-Aid approach. But anyway, there's been a motion, it's been seconded. We're going to consider this as part of the budget cycle.
Yeah, colleagues, if I may, and I agree with considering the larger package as part of the budget cycle, but there's $5 million that's there. We have folks flooding. There are 2 members of our board. And, I would like the commission to at least have the opportunity to vote on it. If you want to send it with an unfavorable recommendation, but I believe the pilot should be voted on by the full commission. This is something that staff has put forward. They did support the program, and we have neighborhoods flooding today.
Well, I mean, Commissioner Fernandez is an alternate, so I think this will be a 2-1 vote.
Understood.
going back.
Unfavorable recommendation, but I think the full commission,
Well,
given the conversation, they should have the right to hear.
We're not making an unfavorable recommendation.
Right, the motion that was seconded and voted on 2-1 will be to send this to the full budget cycle. So if you want to, take this up at the full commission in another capacity and sneak it in, as is you want lately, that's your business, but we'll send this to the full budget cycle for further discussion.
Okay, we'll see it on the April commission, then I'll do it that way.
I look forward to seeing how you sneak it
Thank
in,
you, Mr.
which
Chair.
you've become a master at.
Is there any public
Go ahead.
comment at these
Go ahead.
meetings? Okay, thank you. Daniel Seraldo. So first of all, I wanted to say that data is important, and we've always talked about trying to quantify where the flooding happens. But so I think it's good that the staff did that. However, I think we need to look at the data as well. Like, is it the same person, making the same report? So I'd like to know that in the future, honestly.
Good
because-
question. That's a good meta question because that's true of everything in the city. It's usually the same people complaining. Absolutely right.
Well,
And I hope you take that into consideration on other items where you may not always agree that we get a lot of resident complaints. Yeah, it's the same 3 complaining. So
right, but at the same time, I think we all agree data is important. But like a couple of years ago, we were talking in this committee about having real data like videos and cameras that could really capture flooding. So I'm not trying to say that this survey wasn't a good exercise. I just think we need more data, as much data as we can get. And also, as far as the Lagos area A, that area of Poinciana Park floods all the time. 63rd and Alton is a major thoroughfare. So maybe rather than, because I know there's this sort of like divide on the commission about resiliency, but maybe we could look at this a little separately as far as safety and travel of emergency vehicles, because I don't think any of us want for the next 10 years, every time we go there, someone sees us. And, I've had a few, people think I have something to do with it too. So, so I hope we could keep an open mind about this and hit some of these smaller things while we look at the broader picture.
Can I? So Daniel, I think your comment is very appropriate. So before, what was rejected by 5 members of the board was a really, really big project. But it may be possible to do that one very smaller area, but to do it right. And that may be a $20 or $30 million project as opposed to a $100 million project. And so if it were 20 or 30 and we do have 5 million, then that's a $5 million deposit on doing a project right versus putting a Band-Aid on something. But the earlier project was rejected, was much, much bigger and covered a much more, a larger geographic area.
No, and thank you. And just to respond, like I know about the earlier project because I heard from a lot of residents there. And, I have to say the owners of property on North Bay Road, they're pretty powerful and, litigious people. And I totally get the idea of raising all the roads, but I think also we have to think strategically about building a consensus. And you guys could all try and spend the next year again going to the same people. I kind of think we have other priorities that we might want to look into. And that's why I just hope we don't throw this all away, because I think you both have similar objectives, but just the way we get to it might differ. Thank you.
thanks. Okay. Amy, I see you there. I'm just want to try to get some folks out. What item do you have? Do you have a couple or just one?
Item 11.
Item 11?
The monument.
Oh, good.
item.
And right on time. I was asked to take that at 10:30, so good timing. This is a discussion regarding Monument Island. So what is this item about?
Sure, and good morning, Commissioners. Amy Knowles, Chief Resilience Officer. This item was a referral from City Commission, both on December 8th as well as October 13th. This is an item that deals with a $25,000 contribution to the city, a donation that was supposed to have been used to help restore Monument Island quite some time ago. And I think it was discovered last year that the money was never actually utilized. And so Commissioner Gongora brought it back for basically to make sure that it was followed up on and that it was the money was put forth properly. So the item was heard by the Sustainability Committee, which is made up of residents. And I think they came up with some very unique recommendations, both to enhance the environmental conditions and environmental restoration, as well as to address some of the public safety concerns. And I do have Marine Patrol here as well. So we've actually worked closely with Marine Patrol, and I think we've come up with a solution that could potentially handle both. It would be much more expensive than 25,000. It would be something that would need to be considered in the budget process. But from the environmental perspective, I do think the 25,000 could go towards a complete restoration of the ecosystem on the island. We did find a landscape plan that was prepared back in probably 2013, 2014, that was never carried out. And so we did put that out to bid to see what it would cost. And that could be really beautiful and great as well. And then we have discussed with Marine Patrol the potential of having potential riprap on part of the island to make sure that the boats cannot beach on the island, which would help the seagrass, as well as have a swim-only area, as well as have potential mooring buoys for things like kayaks. So that's the item we have before you, and I also welcome Marine Patrol if they'd like to add.
You want to come up? Hi, good morning. Commissioner Samuel, I see your name on this. This was Commissioner Gongora's, but you took it up?
I did.
Okay, yeah. I like this item. Do you want to say something about it?
No, I think Amy hit it well. We have some existing funds. Flagler has been a concern. The question is, how do we best put that to use? You look like officer, you have some thoughts for us. Go for it.
Let me ask a question. So I don't go there often, but as a kid and over the years, I've gone and it's a nice place to be with your family, but then sometimes you get people they misbehave. But generally speaking, I think it's a nice amenity for our community, and it's beautiful. But I'm very interested in hearing comments about how do we make it safer, restoring it. And one of the questions I have for you too, really with respect to safety, because it does get really popular now, and there's been some incidents there. Do we have cameras or anything there?
No,
No.
not at the moment, not that I'm aware of. Good morning, by the way.
Good morning. Good to see you. Would you recommend cameras? Because when we'll talk about funding, but I've thought maybe we should. I know we have electricity there. I don't know how we'd get Wi-Fi there, but to put some cameras there for safety, because I've seen fights and stuff, and I think it would be helpful if you all can monitor it and we can record things like that, or just for safety reasons, to have some things that would enhance safety. What, if anything, would you recommend? And I loved, Amy, your ideas about mooring, stuff like that, or swim areas.
The camera idea is a great suggestion. Ultimately, I don't think that's the final answer to getting a handle on Monument Island. Monument Island, since you were there as a kid, has changed quite a bit. Since I've been there, it has changed quite a bit. It's not the same anymore. It's not the same amount of people. It's not the same crowds. I just can't, when you outweigh the pros and the cons, it's just a complete one-sided mess. It's a bear to patrol. It's taxing on our resources. Typically on a weekend, I have 4 boats in service, and 2 of them have to be dedicated solely to the island just to babysit that island. There are rules posted on the island all over. There are signs that say what's allowed and what's not allowed. None of them are followed. We spend all weekend long telling people to put the glass away, to stop the fires. They do barbecues. I'm shocked that there's no fires. Because of the crowds, trash buildup every weekend is quite a bit. Because of the crowds, it also attracts a lot of unwarranted type of behavior, such as liveries. Liveries are illegal jet ski rentals. Not to bore you with stats, we arrested 2 people running illegal jet ski rentals just alone in the slow season of 2022. We haven't even gotten to our busy season. We have issued over 121 citations. That's how much our resources are taxed just to that area. It draws a lot of activity. It draws illegal charters to that area. We had, as you guys remember, the Miami Vice illegal charter, where we had a fatality on the island. You remember that? It draws that type of activity. It's just, I can't think of, every weekend, it's the same crowds, the calls for service. We are unable to patrol it at night. We don't have a 24-hour Marine Patrol. No one does. The county doesn't, FWC doesn't, no one does. We could install cameras, but ultimately that's not the final solution. I think that how we recommended to put riprap around the island, preventing the boats from beaching. It will discourage the crowds from going there. And then swim buoys around the island will prevent the boats from anchoring within the shallow areas and making it essentially a sandbar. Currently, haulover is being dredged. There's going to be a lot of boats that are going to be displaced, and they're going to be looking for somewhere to go. I don't think that's a route that that we want to take. We want to prevent these boats from coming over here and having another preventing another haulover or Nixon Beach or that type of activity from occurring here. The loud music, the Venetian Island residents are constantly complaining. It draws a lot of tourists in the area that rent jet skis, and they have no clue where they're going. We go there, we issue 120 citations in 2 months, and next month it'll be the same thing because it's not locals that are going there with the jet ski rentals. It's an ongoing fight. It just doesn't go away. It's not education where we could say, hey guys, this is not an area to go fast, go somewhere else. It's a vicious cycle of just a wave of different tourists that can come along and they just simply don't know. It just makes it really difficult.
Yeah. So are you recommending some of the things that Amy was talking about with the swim buoys,
Yes.
mooring?
Yes.
Yeah.
And leaving maybe a small opening for if a kayak wants to come onto the island, or a small opening for cleanup of the island to repair, the monument, the fencing around it that sometimes people go on there. It's just I think overall it's a better solution to prevent people from going over there and everything that I just basically discussed. It's a
Yeah.
bear.
No,
Monument
no,
Island is-
I'm
if you haven't been there,
aware.
and I welcome you.
No,
to-
no,
I'll be happy to
I have
take-
been there and I don't go there because of everything you just said.
Yeah, I'll be happy to take anyone there. If anyone I'm there every weekend.
Yeah, one idea, and I know you want to go, so we can go sort of the way you're going, and I'd be inclined for sure to do that. Another idea would be, because tying up 2 Marine Patrol boats for that it's not a good use of it's a necessary use of resources, but that's not the way we should be doing things. Another idea we'd have to explore would be just reprogram it, right? Just say what's going on there now stinks. We can't close it per county rules, right? Because when we closed it during COVID, we didn't have the authority to do that because the county, I think by deed, they deeded it to us. So we can't just close the island, right?
Yeah, we actually got some Safe Neighborhood Parks grants dollars for that island, and along with that grant was a covenant that we needed to keep it open to the public. So that can be reversed with approval of the county, but it does take the Board of County Commissioners to approve that change.
Well, one thing I'd say maybe
That's pretty easy.
possibly to explore, I just threw out a name, would we go to someone like a Boucher Brothers and saying, you man it, you program it, you have your own security and stuff. And so like the people that are going there to misbehave, or the liveries that are going there for concessions and stuff, they can't do it because it is now actively programmed by a private business. So if you want to go and tie up or get some food, a wrap or something, you can't grill, you can't barbecue there. You have to, get it from someone there, and you have a lifeguard, all of that. I mean, that's something we might want to explore. And then just basically just reprogram it. If you're going to go and have a nice day with your family, great. But if you're going to go there and drink and fight and misbehave and, have charcoal barbecue grills, you won't be allowed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the administration for these recommendations. I think we have alignment that there is an issue. We also have $25,000 in the bank, but I also see in the administration's memo, there may be a need for additional funding. So I guess what I would like to understand, are there some specific things, quick hits, that we could do with the 25K that are consistent with where we want to go? And then we could greenlight that, go do that, cook the others. And if there's a need for additional funding, you're also in front of the finance committee here. I think we'd entertain that. So I guess what I want to know, is there something today, if if I could, that you're ready to put on the table, or do we need to sort of think that through a little bit more? Amy, what would you say?
Sure. Well, like I mentioned, we found a landscape plan that had been done quite some time ago. Thanks to Public Works, they went and found that for us. And we did put that out to bid. So it'd be interesting to know what the cost would be to clean up the island, to put in more native species of plants that are supposed to be there. This is from the environmental perspective, of course. There's also going to be a cost to design and permitting once we decide what we're going to do there. So that could be two different options where the funding could go. But, as the acting environmental director, of course, I'd recommend that we try to see what the quote would be to enhance the habitat there.
I'm fine with that, and it sounds like that's probably more than the 25,000. In the interim, do we want to try, does the administration recommend that we try these swim-only buffer buoys, the mooring buoys? Should we do that now while we're getting that? That's the question I'm sort of wrestling with.
So I think it would have to be done holistically. None of these are quick and easy. Riprap, mooring buoys, everything will take environmental permitting, studies, approvals. So it would be a capital project.
Let me ask a couple of questions. So, and thanks for the work you do on the water for us. If we do this perimeter, which is probably good, will there be a way for you and the people that we want to get to the island, like for cleanup and stuff? Is that going to be that narrow channel you talked about?
Right.
Okay. And then if we do I guess the native species plants and so forth, would we need to do that first and work from the interior of the island out in terms of the buoys? Because if you put the buoys up, you might not be able to get to the island to do the capital project. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, it needs to be coordinated.
Yeah.
For sure. I mean, we were, I think, thinking in terms of quick wins. It would be great to do some of that work with the landscaping because it's so needed. But ideally, it would be coordinated with the overall design and permitting for the concept for the island.
My concern about spending the landscaping dollars, if you don't put the perimeter up there, you could have people go in and destroy the new landscaping just with barbecue grills and so forth. Do we have a rough order of magnitude of what all this might cost? It's not 25,000, it's a lot more, but are we talking about 100,000 or 200,000 or just a rough estimate?
Right. So we came up with a very, very rough, potentially 250,000. Please don't hold us to that, but that's based on a cost of riprap that we have obtained from other projects. That's based on what we know the cost of waterway markers to be and the cost of permitting and design. But again, very high level.
Yeah. And would we need county approval for doing any of that work?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, please.
This is one of those things that when you speak to the folks that live in the islands, Palm, Hibiscus, and Venetian Islands, their quality of life is very much affected by some of this marine activity, and it's only skyrocketed ever since the pandemic. And I don't know if you agree with that, officer.
Oh, yes.
Okay, and so I hear 250,000, but also I know the cost, I've heard the numbers of the cost for Marine Patrol, and it's very expensive as well. And I think to the extent that we can bring the activity at the island under control, it will relieve our Marine Patrol and it will relieve our residents. I'm just concerned when it gets displaced. The boats are going to go somewhere. So they're not going to be at Monument Island. They're going to go somewhere else. And I think it's just part of a bigger conversation that we do have 40 miles of waterways, that we have a big area of open bay, and that we need to have a more robust Marine Patrol. But in the short term, I'm supportive of the ideas of doing some sort of closure and signage and riprap of the island and whatever else is recommended for its enhancements.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yeah.
Sounds like we need to do a little bit more cooking here. We agree on the problem. We want a solution. I would like to ask the administration to come back in a month with two thoughts. One, more detail on the longer term approach, but maybe also a focused discussion around building on Commissioner Fernandez's thoughts. Any quick hits, things that we could do and fund right away that would help. So there's a lot of good ideas. we want to do something, but I'd like to see if you all could come back in a month. That would be my recommendation on this item.
I will second that to bring it back. I don't know if you're going to be ready in a month to give us a detailed proposal. What,
We
do you
could-
think you can, do you think you need that?
Honestly, with the volume of our projects right now, we could use probably 2 or 3 months.
Yeah, yeah.
We
Yeah.
could try, we could
Yeah, I was
try.
gonna say, I mean, if this becomes a financial issue, so
Right.
we send it to
Yeah.
finance and then, sort of, and I think we can make it a quick discussion at that point, put together a budget, whatever timeline you need. If you need 2 months, 3 months, but this will have to go to budget anyway.
I
include the budget.
I would support that. I'm very supportive of the ideas and I agree with you, Commissioner Fernandez, that we got to get a handle on the safety issues and the homeowners in that area are, plus your resources, they're being tied up. I'd rather you be doing other things, quite frankly.
There are other areas of the city that are being neglected as a result of this. We have to, I mean,
Right.
if we have a lot of square miles of waterway and we have roughly 80 linear miles. We have a lot of waterways that we don't get to on a regular basis as a result of that. 2 boats just are dedicated to the island all the time. With regards to the financials, one of our board members for the Marine Authority Board worked previously in the county's DERM, and I was made aware that they have a funding specifically for this, for restoration projects. And that might be something that we might want to look into. They have apparently funding specifically for this. Just last weekend, to add to, the type of activity, Picnic Island, which is not ours, I'll be happy to show you what Picnic Island looks like. Also on the weekend, it's way busier. It's not patrolled as often because the city of Miami covers just that much more waterway. But that's something that our island, Monument Island, could look like if we start to, not patrol it as much. That's why we constantly have to keep 2 boats on top of there. Just last weekend, there was a very bad jet ski accident, and it involved rentals. So that's what we're trying to avoid.
So you're saying some company is using that as a staging ground to rent?
Absolutely. That's
wow.
exactly what they're doing.
Wow.
A little bit
Up
off
to five
topic, but correct me if
crossroads,
I'm wrong.
And and we've done undercover operations on that island, and we have made several arrests that way. Just walking around the island and,
Yeah.
trying to rent a jet ski, and sure enough, no questions asked, no date of birth, nothing. Just, hey, you want to ride a jet ski? Go.
Crazy.
Yeah, it's a real problem. I mean, there's lots of problems with that island. I wouldn't take my family there because the crowd there is rough. It's also not safe. You can't walk on the island because of broken glass and stuff like that. It's just, it needs to be cleaned up and just made safe. It could be a very nice place for families to go and, tourists and residents to go kayaking and stuff. But people that are choosing to go there just misbehave, like at an outrageous level.
Mr.
You
Chair.
know? Yeah. And so, one of the thoughts I had is, when I mentioned the programming, that was off the cuff. If you look at New York, for those of us who, visited, lived there, Bryant Park used to be known as Needle Park, right? That's where it was really rough and they had to close it and all the drug addicts would go there and do their business. And then, some folks got involved and essentially privatized it in many ways. And it's one of the nicest places in New York now to visit. So, we can definitely go this route because it needs to be restored and made nicer. But, if you guys want to think about programming it, having somebody take it over so that it's constantly manned, not by our police, but by a private entity that will regulate the behavior there, that might be another option for us to explore.
Yeah, I think we should.
And Mr. Chair, just a suggestion, because I hear short-term and I hear long-term solutions. And I think in the short term, if I understand properly, the officers said they need some sort of relief because it's a lot of resources being dedicated to the island right now. And perhaps for the interim purpose, maybe we can ask the county commission if they would give us permission for an interim closure of the island until we get a better handle of what the future of the island could be shaped and could look like.
Personally, I wouldn't support it because I say this a lot. There's nothing more permanent than a temporary government program. So if we temporarily close it, it'll be 2030 before it reopens. So I wouldn't support that just because, the second year anniversary of 2 weeks to flatten the curve. I don't like that kind of stuff. It just never works.
Well, and if I could add, I mean, while it would certainly be extremely well intentioned, right? I mean, my concern is that if you close it, then it's going to be more of an enforcement issue because you're
Exactly
then
what it
gonna,
was during COVID.
Yeah.
If
Right.
the permanent solutions aren't done, then it reverts back to when, for example, when COVID was there. Our property management unit went out there, they put all sorts of signs, and every single week they were vandalized. And they were back again the following week to install signs again, and they were vandalized again. And we had to basically babysit the island the way that we're doing it right now. It's being back to square one. If there's nothing there to actually prevent boats or people from beaching on the island, we'll have to be there. We'll have
okay,
to
so
be there.
can we move this to finance? I think we're all supportive. And Nick, is that something we can do?
Strictly speaking, the committee would typically send to the commission and then have the commission refer it.
We'll put it on the consent, back to the commission with a direction that this actually get transferred to finance.
Yes, because I think we're all supportive. And Amy, if you need a month or 2 months or whatever, and also as Commissioner Samuel said, give us quick fixes and then the long term. I mean, if there's a way that we could wrap this quickly, but even to do a wrap, we'd have to get county permission. Is that right?
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
so it's not going to be so quick, I guess,
Yeah.
but
But that's what I was suggesting. Maybe we should ask them for that for specifically because he was just mentioning to prevent the boating and the beaching on the island. You know, maybe we should ask the county commission for that permission.
I'm okay with that. So I would support that we send it to, we can put that on consent, that we can send this to finance and also send something to the county asking permission for us to do
Do the work.
that we're going to take it on. We'll do it, but we need permission to put some sort of wrap around it so that we can close it to the public. Is that something you would support or you concerned about that?
Honestly, I'd have to speak with the manager and I'd
Okay.
have to speak with
Because
Eric.
it may,
That's a
there may,
bigger,
it's-
broader thing.
I know
to
you want to
actually
do the
close
whole,
island.
right, the holistic
Yeah.
thing and, okay.
Well, I mean, there's no sense, well, we can come up with a budget number. I think it's not the county's business how much we spend. If we just tell them the plan and the idea, if they say no, it doesn't matter what we budget for it. So, can we do it, on parallel tracks? You start the permission process while we appropriate the dollars.
Yeah, I think we've got a clear direction that we're gonna put together what we think it will cost. And in the meantime, we're going to engage with our counterparts at the county to see what the approval process would look like and how we could get there so that the things dovetail hopefully at the end.
So that they may be a cleaner way to do it rather than a specific, can we close this to ask you to begin the process with the county to see what needs to be done. And then we'll have a head start on how we get there.
Right. That makes sense.
Okay.
Okay. Do you have what you need?
We do, but just one more item. This item is also being heard on Monday at Neighborhoods, and I think that was referred by you, Commissioner Richardson. Did you want to hear it Monday as well? I think we kind of covered it
No,
here.
I
Okay,
don't.
thank you.
So if that's my item, I'll defer it.
Okay, thank you.
And then Officer Sanchez's comment about there might be money at the county for some of this work, restoration work. If that's the
Yeah.
case, let's try to avail ourselves of that money.
Sure, I can give you an update on that. I do have a whole copy of the Biscayne Bay Trust Fund, and
Just go get it. If
I
it's
have it.
available, go get it.
Normally, that's used for the county for projects that they are doing. So that would have to be, go to county commission, and we would have to get approval for funding.
Okay.
It is an option.
Amy, when would you like to come back, May or June for the long-term and short-term?
Sure, let's shoot for May.
All
that
right, so we'll continue this to May 13th and then we'll do a separate C4 referral to move this to finance for the financial discussion.
Yeah.
Okay.
Officer Sanchez, a question for you. Is it your knowledge, when I drive across the Julia Tuttle, it seems to me like we've also got a situation, I call them sort of these gypsy rentals. People are parking on the Julia Tuttle and then they get picked up and taken out 100 yards into the bay where they get the jet ski rentals there.
Yes.
It's a big
That's
business. isn't it?
exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
And we're working currently with the FDOT. A lot of that activity, actually, most of it is happening on the city of Miami side.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we don't have jurisdiction for most of it because it's
That's
on the
not
city of
ours.
Miami side and it's a state road. And then when they're in the water, what jurisdiction do we have there?
It's the state's water.
Yeah.
We don't, they don't need to have a BTR. So for example, if everyone here knows where the Marine Patrol office is, there are plenty of pontoon boats that anchor right across, and they basically essentially run a jet ski operation from their pontoon boat. What they cannot do is, conduct business on city property, but as long as the full transaction occurs over water, it's a loophole.
It's
where they could
amazing.
Run. That's exactly what's happening over on the Miami side. They know, not to come over to our side, as we'll take enforcement action right away.
Yeah.
But that's exactly what that is. It's a jet ski business that's running off the side of the Julia Tuttle.
Yeah, I watch it. Yeah, it's amazing. They're so
Yeah,
clever.
There's
So
quite a few of them.
so they park on the Miami side, so we don't have jurisdiction there.
That's right.
Miami would have jurisdiction because it's still the city of Miami for business, but if they step into the water, Miami loses,
I
because
would-
they can't pick up the people on the water, right? So they just kind of,
Should that happen on our end, what I could tell you would be if there would be a pontoon running on our end and they were going to the seawall or to the beach, I would imagine that they are using city property
Right.
Indirectly to run their business because they're shuttling their customers back and forth from there.
And
So-
Mr. Chair, this is something that is very interesting because it even affected with the shuttle that the county was trying to do on the shoulder lane of the Causeway. They were trying to remove these cars from there and they tried engaging. In fact, even Mayor Cava was involved in reaching out to the city of Miami. The city of Miami police completely ignores. They don't give, about it and not willing to cooperate at all. And our police were actually trying to solve the issue, and their police in the city of Miami, it falls
Yeah.
on deaf
because
ears.
a lot of those jet skis end up at Monument Island. So like, it's a whack-a-mole situation. Like, we can regulate our jurisdiction, but the folks are coming from elsewhere and then
And that's the biggest frustration with the Bay, how much we can do on our side, but the thing is that the Bay is an open bay also. And so unless other jurisdictions are policing properly, they're part of the waters. What we do is very limited.
We need signs installed there.
All right.
Signage and some sort of a penalty, whether it's a fine or a tow or both, a combination of both.
Where?
As you drive it along the north and south side of the Julia Tuttle, it's not only businesses running out of the side there, people are usually using it recreationally. There are people fishing,
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
treating that area as if it was a beach.
Homeless.
I mean, putting signs there, we'd have to get the approval from FDOT, and then would it be City of Miami as well? Yes?
We're in communication with FDOT to install signs.
We're supportive of those efforts. What would we need to do to help, our Marine Patrol to try to just curb that activity a little bit, if it's signs?
I think there's signs.
If there's anything else that Marine Patrol has identified that maybe.
Give us recommendations. and-
On our end, we wouldn't be enforcing that. We're on the water.
Yeah, just
So,
putting
like,
signs.
Any unit that's, or officer that's assigned to that area would be enforcing that. We're on a boat. I mean, we're not,
Maybe a reso
we wouldn't be the
asking
ones
FDOT.
towing the cars, for example.
Yeah.
Or issuing the fines. If a Marine Patrol officer is on the side of the Julia Tuttle in his car, I think I'm gonna have an issue with that. So
Yeah.
I would like my guys to be on the water,
All right.
preferably.
I mean, we can look into putting signs. We just have to get FDOT's approval, basically, saying commercial activities prohibited on state roads.
Maybe it's a reso asking FDOT to install to signage to that effect.
And I'm happy to speak with Secretary Miller also. We've become very friendly in the past few weeks.
Yeah. The other thing I was thinking, Amy, is communication fall under you still or no? Does communication still fall under you, the communication department? What I'm going to ask is, to the extent that we get word out via social media and other to the public saying that, these, gypsy operators are largely unlicensed. We don't know the quality of the craft. There are real safety issues. Sort of put a message that, folks need to be working with people that are, real businesses that are certified, that have insurance, et cetera, because I think a lot of the activity out there is totally unregulated. And, you know, tourists and residents are renting vessels that are not safe, and that they need to be aware that they should be trying to do business with, you know, reputable organizations, that many of the ones that are out there on social media, you know, advertising, you know, jet ski rentals are, you know, totally unregulated. To try to maybe make it harder for these folks to do business.
I'd be happy to speak with Melissa about that.
I thought the Biscayne Bay Aquatic Preserve patrols and also the county patrols, because they have jurisdiction. Do you know?
The county could patrol that area, so could FWC.
Yeah,
It's, I mean, everyone's spread thin,
right.
and that's falls on that area that the commissioner keeps talking about is City of Miami. We don't have those issues here, at least not yet.
Got it.
All right. Thanks for your time. Thanks.
Thank
for
you.
everything. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, colleagues, anything you want me to take out of order? Commissioner Fernandez says we're going to defer item number 13. So thank you. Anything else? Okay. I see Alfredo in the back. Want to take up your item? What number is that? Number four? Okay. Come on up. This is to discuss a height increase to 80 feet for office space in the CD3 district on Washington Avenue between Lincoln Road and 17th Street. And do you have any presentations?
We had circulated it, so we wanted to make it, I know you had a long agenda, so we're not, unless you want a presentation.
I mean, just for folks who might be watching at home, if you want to pull it up. Is there one or no?
No.
Okay, never mind. Okay. All right, you want to tee this up?
Good morning. Yes, good morning. Alfredo Gonzalez on behalf of Greenberg Trog, here representing client. On this ordinance, we are requesting on Washington Avenue on 1685 and 1655, there's an existing 70+ foot building, office building that was built in the 90s and a vacant lot. So on this block, we're asking my client has acquired both sites. For the record, it's KK 1665 Washington LLC and BSD Raleigh trustee, Mr. Schwo's companies. So what we want to do is build a Class A office building. We know there's a need for an office building, and we take this site, demolish the existing building, but the code today allows only 50 feet. Throughout the block, you already have under construction, everyone sees the cranes out there. The Thompson Hotel is coming up in the Citibank. That's going to be at 83 feet. And around the block there, the zoning allows 75 feet for construction. And just south of us on Washington Avenue, 100 feet. So what we're asking the committee is to support the text amendment to allow us to go forward and design a building and to go through the Historic Preservation Board process. One thing I did want to add, because I noticed that in the referrals, we're going to the planning board as well. We'd like to offer to see if we could go to HPB as a advisory. I know that when we were dealing with the Raleigh project, we had proffered that as well to go, and I think there's a resolution also that encourages it, but maybe after planning board, before it goes to first reading, we could be heard at HPB as well, if it's okay.
Okay, so you're asking obviously for this committee to take a favorable stance, but also simultaneously with that to get a, I guess you said, what was the word you used for HPB? Just an advisory opinion from them, and then obviously this would have to go to the full commission for approval, and then assuming we have a favorable stance, this would have to go to DRB. Obviously,
Just
HPB.
HPB.
Just HPB.
HPB. So I think the next step for this ordinance would be to go to the planning board. I believe it's scheduled for.
Yeah, it's this was a dual referral. So this has been noticed for the March 22nd planning board meeting. We could take it to the Historic Preservation Board as a discussion item at their April meeting, but their April meeting is on April 12th, which means that first reading of the ordinance would be at the city commission's May meeting as opposed to April 6th. So that's the only thing. Now, if you went to the commission for first reading on April 6th, you'd go to the HPB before second reading. So from a sequencing standpoint, it's really up to you. We can do either one.
If we could do it then between first and second reading, would that be, in order to keep the process going, we're trying to, and we're working on the designs of the plans to get submittal into Historic Preservation Board. Once the text amendment gets approved, we know there's a need in the community, and we're really trying to fast track it. So we will eventually have to go back to HPB for the full project, whatever the code, text amendment is approved by the commission. But if we do it, I guess, between first and second reading, since it's a week apart.
The HPB review is not required. So they could go to the HPB for that preliminary discussion at their April 12th meeting between first and second reading.
If it's not required, why do you want to go there?
We've talked to MPAPL, and also when we were working with, you had sponsored the resolution that helped the Raleigh project.
Right.
That's about to get building permits for everyone, for the record.
Great.
Hopefully we should be full steam.
Thank you. I was wondering about that
summer.
the other day. Like when
By summertime,
It's gonna be
they're about to get the full building permit with the demo permit that needs to go together, and work should start full blown by summertime. We wanted to give input to HPB. We felt that it was beneficial last time, and I believe, isn't there a resolution now? I was talking to Daniel Serraldo, there is a resolution. After we did that at the Raleigh, I think it was productive, and on other projects. So
Can I ask a question?
Sure. Yeah.
So I want to hear from staff. So I got briefed on this because I wasn't familiar with the project. So I'm pretty well briefed up on it. But what's the administration's position?
We're supportive of this. We recommended that the land use committee endorse it and recommend favorably. We're recommending in favor of the ordinance change at the planning board.
Okay, and the height of the building that is part of this, that is going to be removed, is that like 70 or?
it's over 70 feet. So that's existing today.
Basic, but you're saying under the existing 50 feet, even though that building is more than 50, it's historic.
It was built in the 90s.
Yeah.
But it's legal non-conforming because the code has changed since then. It's gone up and down. The code was amended to allow the Thompson Hotel years ago, I guess.
Yeah.
That's under construction now. That's 83 feet.
And just tell me again, because I didn't understand the benefit of going to HPB on an advisory. Is that just to sort of get some sort of preliminary feedback before you eventually go, or?
It helps us, gives us some preliminary feedback as we develop the plans as well. Ultimately, this will have to be approved by the Historic Preservation Board. Even with the text amendment at whatever the code allows, let's say allows 80, it still needs to get reviewed to make sure it's suitable within the context. We'd like to get some preliminary feedback from them. That way we can incorporate it into our plans to make it a smoother process when we get to the formal hearing.
And Tom, so if we move this today, then it'll go back to the commission for first reading?
We'll go to the planning board first, and then it would come back to the commission for first reading on April 6th.
And it was a dual referral?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to move the item. I support the change, so I'll move it.
Yeah, I'll second it. And yeah, I'll say my two pieces. So I second it. Yeah, this to me, it's additional height, doesn't, given where it's at, doesn't bother me whatsoever. And I like Class A office space. I like it in this neighborhood. And where this project is going to happen, to me, has been a sort of a very choppy, troubled area. It's not, this hopefully will class up that side of sort of the Lincoln Road area that butts into Soundscape Park. Like, I like this project in general, and if your ask is for additional height, I'm fine with it. I think this is a good project.
Can I do a follow-up? It really prompted a question. So you're making a commitment to do Class A office space, right? So we're not going to give a height increase and then it's going to be something else, right?
Yes, the text amendment is only granted at 80 feet if it's for office
If it
space.
is, okay, perfect.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I too am supportive. I believe that we are in an important moment as we sort of pivot and diversify our economy. To those who wonder if there's demand for all these offices, I would just say the developers in the private sector wouldn't build them if they didn't think they could lease them. So I think we are on sound footing. And I guess my question, and I will be supporting my colleagues today, is with the approval process that would be in place, Alfredo, what is the timeline to get a shovel in the ground?
The idea would be to get through all the entitlements and be able to get to a shovel in the ground next year. Obviously, we have to go through the permitting process, but they're in design. Mr. Shaw has hired Peter Marino to design the building. Interesting architect. I don't know if you're familiar with Peter Marino.
If
who's
you're
done
not
a lot
familiar
of.
with him, check him out. It's
He's very,
sexy, cool. Yeah, it's going to be cool.
And he does all the Hermes and Chanel. All the competitors use him for their signature building. So we're excited to bring. And plus, Mr. Shaw is actually looking for office space. I know he's mentioned to several of you that he's trying to move more operation here, and finding office space in Miami Beach is a challenge because what's available, the Starwood project is all sold out. So that's not an option. So that's why I'm trying to fast track this as much as possible, get to the HPB, to then move into construction and permitting.
Yeah, fast track is the word I was looking for.
sir.
You know, when we have good projects, we want speed to value. There's huge demand. We're at the right moment. So I will join my colleagues in support.
Thank you.
Public comment? Okay, thank you. So Daniel Serraldo with Miami Design Preservation League. So yes, we did see that there is a rendering in the agenda, but so we saw that rendering, but we didn't see anything about setbacks or like how much lot coverage it would be. And in the rendering that I looked at, you know, the Greenview Hotel, which is the Art Deco hotel next door, it's sort of, you know, this new project looks like it's much closer to the road than the Art Deco hotel. So that's why I was hoping that we could have a little more time to look at setbacks. We always try to have some setbacks to honor historic buildings. So possibly there's a way we can work together and have the height increase. But a lot of times people do a height increase and then they do offer a little bit of a setback to have that openness. But the one thing I did want to ask Tom Mooney is I thought the commission had a resolution that for height increases, the HPB would have an advisory look, Tom. So I remember Michael Gongora had brought that to the commission. So
There's a requirement on GU properties for if and when the city commission contemplates a GU height waiver, that the Historic Preservation Board must make a recommendation on that prior to the adoption of the ordinance.
that's a
in the-
requirement, right?
That's in the code.
But what about the resolution?
I'm not in all candor familiar with the resolution. A resolution is typically something that is more aspirational. If it's not in the code, it's not technically a requirement. I think for purposes of this application, the applicant has agreed that they would present the proposed code change to the Historic Preservation Board, get their feedback that we could then report back to the commission on before second reading.
Okay, I mean, I'll have to look it up again. My understanding was resolutions were policy directions of the commission, and maybe Nick has some input on that.
If the commission adopted a resolution that that height increases obtain an advisory recommendation of the HPV, that's a policy that the commission adopted on as to itself. I have to look, Tom. I can't remember. I remember there was a height item, but the one I remember is the one you're saying. I have to look.
I'm sorry, Daniel, I just don't recall that resolution. If they did, and it's the policy direction, if the commission feels that the HPB opinion is critical before first reading, they could always defer first reading on April 6th to the May meeting.
Okay, no, I'm not trying to defer anything. If anything, I'm just trying to have more input from the community. You know, we hear from a lot of the developers that, you know, I just want to finish my thought. Like, I'm not trying to slow this down or stop it. It's actually the opposite. It's that the HP has the final say. And, you know, I was talking to some developers recently who said, we meet with the commissioners and they love this. And then it goes to the HPB and they don't like it. And so I think since HP has a final say, it is always good policy just to have their input. They are the experts. on historic preservation. So, but overall, it sounds like a very interesting proposal. Thank you.
Okay. Well, you got your approval.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah, look forward to seeing this project. Sounds really
We'll
great.
we'll keep you all abreast as it goes through the process.
Okay. All right, colleagues, I'll go back to the top of the agenda unless you want something taken out of order. Amy, you're still here. What item do you have? 14? Let's do 14. And then, is that it for you? Then you can, okay. Let's do item number 14. Commissioner Samuel, this is your item.
Yep.
Discuss the raising of private homes.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chair. This actually came from the community just as a request. They've seen other parts of the country where their homes are elevated. And the questions as teed up were from the referral were basically, what are the rules of the road? What is in place today? Number two, is there funding in place, either at the national, state, local level? And then third, in conversations with the administration, the question sort of came about, is there anything the city could do to support private properties that want to go down this path? We know job one for our body is to protect public rights of way, public infrastructure. That's got to be our focus. At the same time, we need to have a resilient community, and over 70% of the land in Miami Beach is private. So with that, I'd invite Amy to discuss her thoughts.
Sure, I would be happy to. Tom, did you want to add first? Since you brought that, okay. Okay, great, thank you. So essentially, we do have a unique opportunity to help facilitate home elevation through the FEMA FMA program. It would help us to encourage people to think about it. We could leverage federal dollars to address some of our broader goals. This could be part of our private property adaptation program, which was approved by the commission last year. This could be a segment of that, and we're actually building it into the program. So how this would actually work is a homeowner would apply for the private property adaptation assessment, and we're expecting to open that this summer. If they might qualify for federal funding, then we would go ahead and work with a consultant to help them develop their federal application, which is actually quite cumbersome. It includes a benefit cost analysis, and we've identified one of our consultants to do that. So overall, we know that there's about 74 repetitive loss properties on Miami Beach, meaning that we do know that we have applicants that may qualify. We're 93% in the special flood hazard area. You know, we are high risk. So we do have an opportunity to take our private property adaptation program and help encourage homeowners to do home elevation should they so desire.
Mr. Chair, if I could just follow up, that's very helpful, Amy Sue. You have existing funding in place as part of the private property adaptation. You believe that this would be a worthwhile use of some of the funds that are in place, and it would be also an opportunity to communicate existing rules and regulations to the community. Is that accurate?
Yes, absolutely. As part of their scope of work, we would have a community meeting about home elevation, about this FEMA federal program. The funding is actually quadrupled from what it used to be with the new federal funding coming down. So it's great timing. The applications would be due this fall. And then our consultant would be working one-on-one with the property owners to fill out those applications and submit them for them.
Great. I think that is a fine direction. I would be at this point willing to conclude the item. What action, if any, is needed by the body? Because it's existing funding. Something sounds like you want to do it. What do we need to do today, if anything, colleagues? Folks, any action required here?
I have a couple of questions, but
No, go ahead.
So, because it relates to the action. So these are federal dollars.
Yeah, these are federal dollars, and depending on the specifics of the home and whether or not they qualify, they could receive up to 75% of federal funding. It could be 25% local share, which would be our city. There are some different ratios that they use, but the concept is we have said that homeowners can receive up to $20,000 in a private property adaptation grant, and that could be part of our local part if they qualify. So different pieces have to fall into place.
So there is a local match requirement.
Potentially, depending on the property's issues.
And do we have a budget for that?
Well, we think that it would depend, but we could. So it depends on the cost and of the elevation, and it depends on a couple different things.
Okay, well,
Yeah, so we're not quite sure, but we would
Yeah.
have to assist through the process and then see what came out. You know, we would hear from FEMA probably next spring about that, and then we would have to make some decisions from there.
so has this program been finalized by the federal government?
Yeah, the program's been around for some time. It's a
So,
grant program.
so I'm going to need some more information on what the potential local costs could be. So if you're saying we would potentially have to pay, the local match would be 20 or 25%. It sounds like of a max of $20,000. Is that right?
Well, that's through our private property program, but a home could have 0%. It depends on sort of the degree of issues that the home has.
So if they qualify for the federal program, is it a requirement that the city participate in the cost? Or is it an option of the local government?
We have to look into that.
Okay, well, there are a lot of open questions.
Mhm.
So I'm supportive generally, but these are questions that are important because if it's a requirement, or maybe the way the federal program is written is that if the local government doesn't participate, then the homeowner can't get the federal. And so we want them to get the federal, then we have to figure out where the funds are going to come from. So I need to know what the potential exposure for the city is going to be on this. And then if there's a mandate that we participate at a certain level, then what are we going to do? Are we going to set aside $100,000, or what are we going to do? And then also we may get pushback from some homeowners that we are subsidizing some homeowners and not others if it's taxpayer dollars that, everybody's putting in the bucket. So I'd like to get some more information on the program. It sounds interesting. Also, and maybe Daniel, you can answer this question. I know at the last meeting, we had some conversation about historical properties, right? And you guys are working on an incentive program. And it's oftentimes that these older homes are the ones that may be more likely to be elevated, right? If somebody wants to save them. So is that something, Daniel, you guys, I know that you're taking 2 or 3 months to work on a program. Is that something you guys are looking at?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. And I remember before you were a commissioner, you came to our resiliency workshop and we were talking about it then, we're talking about it now, hazard mitigation, proactively versus after a flood. But it's not, based on the resources that we have now and the time, we were focused on that demolition fee, but also on the other side, the incentives. So I believe for April, we were going to talk about that demolition fee component, but on the incentive side, there's a question, could there be a way to help homeowners to make their properties more resilient? And I agree with you. Well, it sounds like what you're saying is probably money shouldn't go towards properties that will then be knocked down, because if the federal government is paying for something, they probably don't want it to be, knocked down in 2 years. So maybe as the city develops this program, there could be added emphasis on the historical buildings, knowing that those are ones that really need to rise up, no pun intended, over the next decades, and that we know historic buildings have a public benefit as well as part of our DNA.
So Amy is part of, so what I'd like to do, colleagues, if it's okay with you all, is, and this is your item, Commissioner Samuel, and so, I'd like to get it back here next month with the answer to some of these questions. And at the same time, if we could move it back to the commission with a consent item to send it to finance, because if we need to try to find some local match dollars, we should consider it as part of this budget cycle. So that's what I would like. But Amy, if it's the will of the body that you come back with some of these answers, I'd like you to find out what their federal requirement is on their investment and then somebody destroying a house. So as Daniel mentioned, I have a feeling that the federal program says if we give you the money, you can't then raise the house 2 years later. But that's something that would be very important to me, because obviously if we're participating, we would not want to make an investment in something and then have it torn down.
Mhm.
Right. So if you could get a couple of these general questions, like, I want to know what the local requirement is. If the federal government gives money, is there a local match? Is that a requirement? For we have to do that, or they don't get the federal dollars? And then I'd like to find out what the protection is on the program. And then what I think, if it's in the agreement of the body, we'll then send it to finance also, because by that time, maybe you're going to tell us that you think we should participate at some level. I don't know.
Mr. Chair, if I could. So Amy, do you feel like by next meeting, you would have some of those answers?
Yes, and we have a very thorough proposal that outlines this, so I think I have them. We're
Okay.
happy to put them together and package them and bring them back and have the
Perfect.
discussion.
Then Commissioner, if I understood your intent, and I appreciate, because I do think those are important, that we understand obligations of the city, whether some homes would have a zero requirement at the local, that we would bring this back next month. Also refer to finance in case you want to dedicate some funds. And if that was in the form of a motion, I'm seconding it.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
we're done. And Amy, if you have those questions and you want to just make a time for me, I'm okay with that, because I don't,
Okay, thank you.
thanks.
Nick, is Commissioner Minor still on?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes,
Okay.
he's here.
Hi, Commissioner Minor. Just in the interest of time, I don't know how much time you'll be with us. I'm going to call up a couple of your items. Are there any that are more of a priority than others?
Not to me. I don't know if staff has any priority, but not to me.
Do you want to tee up item number 5? Discuss the creation of a 6th Street overlay between Washington and Alton Road. I'm curious what you're thinking about here.
Yeah, and this is an idea that came out from the Flamingo Park Neighborhood Association, and they had drafted a resolution and had been working with Tom. And I'll turn it over to Tom to explain in more detail.
Okay, Mr. Chair, as Commissioner Minor indicated, the Flamingo Park Neighborhood Association passed a resolution last August where they came up with some different ideas about how they could create some restrictions for development in the area between 5th and 6th Street, that zone CPS2. And the purpose of it was to provide a transitional area between the lower scale RM1 Flamingo Park area to the north of 6th Street and the more intense medium intensity commercial district that's located between 5th and 6th Street. When we met with the Flamingo Park Neighborhood Association, we had expressed some concern, this is staff, with some of their proposals. And at the last Land Use Committee meeting in October, direction was given to facilitate a meeting directly between the Flamingo Park Neighborhood Association and property owners that would be affected by the overlay. Staff had this meeting on December 29th of 2021. And while it was productive and amicable, there wasn't a lot of consensus that was reached between the two groups. So we went ahead and prepared some background data for consideration by this committee. We've included within the package a couple of things. One, a map that shows the different property ownership within the area to show that there are a lot of opportunities for lot aggregation. We've also included a map that shows the building's contributing status and non-contributing status. And unlike other historic districts, there's not a lot of cohesion with regard to a number of continuous contributing properties. As such, we've come up with a draft ordinance that does not go as far as the Flamingo Park Neighborhood Association has proposed, but it does incorporate some transitional elements that we think would improve the transition of the lower scale RM1 property to the north to the more intense commercial district to the south. And the draft ordinance that we have proposed includes things such as prohibiting outdoor bars within 100 feet of the south side of 6th Street, limiting outdoor restaurant and or bar seating located above ground to no more than 100 seats when located within 100 feet of the south side of 6th Street, as well as limiting the hours until 10 p.m. However, we have recommended a provision that the planning board could modify those through the conditional use process. We've also suggested that outdoor ambient music and television sets would be prohibited within 100 feet of the south side of 6th Street unless approved by the planning board through the CUP process. That access points to hotels, suite hotels, apartment hotels, as well as food and beverage establishments serving alcohol would be limited to the side streets so that they were not fronting directly on 6th Street, and that they have a minimum setback from 6th Street. And then finally, we've suggested adding certain nuisance uses to the list of prohibited uses for the entire CPS2 district. These uses include things like hostels, convenience stores, smoke and vape stores, package stores, the retail sale of alcohol for off-premise consumptions, and additional other uses may be added. So we're recommending that the Land Use Committee discuss this general framework, provide any policy direction. If there's consensus on this, we could bring a more developed ordinance back to the Land Use Committee on May 13th, or if you feel that something is ready to be referred to the planning board, you can make that recommendation to the full commission.
One question I have,
Commissioner
Tom.
Meyer?
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, thank you, Chair. Tom, has this draft ordinance been, have you consulted with the property owners and the Flamingo Park Neighborhood Association on it?
Not directly, no. We made this part of the agenda package in hopes that they would be reviewing the agenda package, but we've not sent this out to the property owners or to the Flamingo Park Neighborhood Association directly.
I guess I'm just wondering if we should do that before we make any decisions.
We could certainly, if it's the will of the body, if you'd like to defer this another month or 2 months, we could try to set up another meeting with the Flamingo Park Neighborhood Association and the property owners, or at least transmit this to them directly and ask them for their feedback and if they would like to meet with us before the next meeting.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I think that's a good idea. You know, we're trying to bridge the needs of our residents, legitimate commercial interests. Tom, I appreciate you've done the outreach, but if it is the desire of the sponsor to have that one more round to get some more concrete feedback, I would be supportive of that.
I have a question. So I do think we should go back to the Flamingo Park and also the business community and get input on this. A couple of questions. So I think I'm following the area, and it includes between 5th and 6th, Washington and Lenox. So that last block, which between, I guess, is Lenox and Alton, is that excluded from this or no?
I don't believe that we included it because there is already a large building between Lenox and Washington. We certainly could include it just to take into account any future changes in use, but because that building was completed, we only made it between Lenox and Washington.
Okay, and to the question on Washington, you know, Washington is a much more commercial street than the others, 6th Street, or so. Is there a reason, because some of the restrictions you mentioned, you know, we may not want to put on Washington Avenue. So I'd like to ask that you look at that again to see if we are going to move forward, and I don't know if the body will, but if we are going to move forward, at least consider taking that half block out that faces Washington, because that is, you know, it's really much more commercial as across the street would be. So I don't understand, you know, don't see why we would have those limitations, because it's really a different part of the community, and there's no residential right there. It's a hotel across the street. So I would take a look at that, and then I agree with my colleagues that let's go back and get input, and then I think it's the will that we'll bring it back then. I think that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and I agree with your comments too. And personally, I'll look to you, Tom, and the team to guide us on this as to, you know, what your recommendations are. I believe, you know, there's some logic in transitioning into the residential neighborhoods, but there is already a fair amount of commercial activity on 6th Street. So, you know, 6th Street to me, and I think our police and other would agree, is a stressful area for our city. You know, there's I think part of it is the commercial area. I think it's around Meridian. It congregates a lot of folks that are up to no good. I'd be curious to see if through zoning or other means, there are things we can do to make that area safer and make some of the folks that like to congregate there and commit illegal activities to just go away, because that is a street that is stressful.
And just for clarification, Commissioner Richardson, you were mentioning the area east of Euclid?
So not necessarily the entire area east of, but where the alley would be to Washington,
Yeah, that makes sense.
because that's very commercial, and to the north of that is a hotel.
Mhm.
So.
Yep.
And then if I could ask another question, Chair. So Tom, what is the height at Jefferson and 6th, where the height of the new fire station? What's that going to be?
I believe that is, I think, 35 feet. It's either 35 or 40 feet. Yeah. Perhaps they are going to 50.
Yeah, so, because I personally believe in and the chair mentioned that there are all sorts of challenges we have, and I know the area well because we're using that location for warehousing food right now. So we're there quite often. There are a lot of challenges on that street. And I actually think the fire station is going to bring much needed stability to the area because of the who will be there. So, but I think we should also look at that if it's going to be 50 feet. I don't know what the number is, but there are a lot of single story buildings on the street now, and I would obviously we don't want skyscrapers, but there's some 2-story buildings that Alton and Lenox is, I think, a 5-story building, but that again is more commercial next to Alton. So, but yeah, I'd like to hear more about it.
I think by acclamation, if it's okay, we'll move this to continue this to the May 13th meeting, so we have enough time to do the outreach. And then we'll come back to you hopefully with a summary of the input that we've gotten from both groups. And then we'll look at Washington Avenue in terms of making sure that the regulations, because you're correct, the intent wasn't to regulate that particular corner. So we'll just have to find a creative way to sort of make sure Euclid is covered, but not Washington.
Wonderful. Okay, we'll conclude this. Commissioner Minor, I'll stick with you. How about number 9? Not controversial whatsoever. A discussion regarding whether to prohibit apartment hotels in additional districts or throughout the city of Miami Beach. We all know this issue. Do you want to tee it up?
Sure. And yeah, we all know the issue, obviously, and we did prohibit the apartment hotels, any new apartment hotels in RPS 1, RPS 2 in the south of 5th neighborhood. But I thought it was worthy of a discussion to look at other areas in the city where it might be appropriate, and also to look at any changes to the definition of apartment hotels that may be warranted. And again, I'll turn it over to Tom. Thanks.
Yeah, we went ahead and took a look at all of the other zoning districts in the city. As the commission will recall, in August of 2021, an ordinance was sent to the planning board and then adopted by the commission in October that prohibited future apartment hotels in the RPS 1 and RPS 2 districts. And that closed a loophole where you had 2 zoning districts that did not permit hotels, suite hotels, or short-term rentals, but apartment hotels had been part of that zoning district for some time. And unfortunately, there were some applications that were able to game that definition. And so within that district, that loophole has been closed. We did check all of the other districts in the city, and all of the other districts in the city where apartment hotels are currently permitted do allow for hotels. And so in looking at it, we don't believe that there are any other districts where you need to further prohibit apartment hotels, because they are actually less intense than a hotel use. And if a developer wanted to have a transient use, they would just simply operate a hotel. They probably wouldn't go through the trouble of opening an apartment hotel. However, apartment hotels do have practical uses because there are a number of business models, particularly in the more intense multifamily zoning districts such as RM3. There are projects such as Canyon Ranch, the W Hotel, the One Hotel, and even some of the newer models that we believe are going to be coming online within the Faena Overlay District, the Sagamore, Ritz-Carlton, where you are going to have both luxury residential uses as well as transient uses. So it is an effective definition that we would recommend being retained. We've suggested two changes within the definition of apartment hotel that are substantive. One was based upon a recommendation of the Inspector General that we clarify the lobby requirement, because currently the apartment hotel definition requires that units be accessed through a hotel, but it doesn't specifically specify whether or not all those units have to be accessed either by leaving the hotel lobby or whether you have to access those units internally. And the way that we've always applied the definition is that you do have to have a hotel lobby, but you could leave that lobby to access the units. And that's designed for those older buildings that have existing open corridors like catwalks that would allow them to still have their lobby, but still have access to the units. Most of the newer buildings, they typically will be accessed through internal corridors. So we have modified the definition to take that into account. The other thing we had suggested is that perhaps we need to look at whether or not an apartment hotel should have a minimum of one apartment unit or whether there should be more apartment units. In the draft that we had proposed and we had included in the memo, we had suggested that a majority of the units would have to be apartment units. But in rethinking that and talking to some of the developers and developers representatives, they've indicated that from a practical standpoint, that may not make as much sense because oftentimes these can fluctuate. There may be instances where within a larger building, the pool of units might be majority hotel or they might be majority apartment units. It tends to fluctuate. And more importantly, since within a multifamily district where you're allowed to do all hotel units, from a practical standpoint, it also may not make sense. So that's something that we'd like to continue to explore. Additionally, there was a suggestion during the agenda briefings that perhaps we mandate a minimum unit size for the lobby so that the lobbies don't end up being these small little closets. And we think that's a good suggestion too. And we'd like to further fine tune the definition to include that.
Mr. Chair, can I just ask a question? Tom, I found your conversation there very helpful. One of the things that's running through my head is you said that maybe we don't need to have a majority apartments. That's something we're thinking. Today it's one. Is there middle ground that you're contemplating? Do we think there definitely should be more than one, but it could be a lower percentage than 50? Is that where we're heading?
That's what we're thinking about. I think that by removing the loophole from those districts that didn't allow hotels takes the pressure off of that. But I think that's something that we wanted to explore just to make sure that one was either the right one or whether or not there needed to be a few more units as part of that definition.
Okay, so it looks like we've still got some stuff to digest. I don't know what the will of my colleagues are or the sponsor, but I, for one, would like to hear a little more when this is flushed out and perhaps here at a committee next month. That would be my inclination.
Can I? Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think that we need to work on this a little bit more suggested. So I like the idea of looking at the lobby. I don't like a postage size lobby. I think it should have to be a real lobby. I'm curious to learn more about the number of units because I could really argue it either way, right? So, and I don't know if the people that would be living in the building that are not in a apartment hotel, if they have any choice on You know, are they making a decision to move into the building after they know it is an apartment hotel? Because with only, if it's only one unit, right, then there might be more peaceful enjoyment in terms of people not coming and going so much. And then the more people that are having it as a hotel, then the people that are living there on a permanent basis are probably having less peaceful enjoyment with people coming and going. So I'd be curious to hear more about that. And, you know, I also could see both sides of the entrance from the outside. I would say, generally speaking, my gut is that I don't like the idea of having entrances on the outside of the building, because you could have adjoining buildings that are residential, and then, you know, they're constantly having luggage rolled down the catwalks and so forth. So I'd like to hear more about that as well. Okay.
And Mr. Chair, I like to echo a little bit of that, because I too do not like the idea of catwalk buildings being used for this purpose. And I do feel we need to maintain that lobby component, but a real lobby component, not just, okay, this small space here is a lobby. I feel that, you know, there should be a lobby, and whatever units used for hotels should be accessed through hallways that are connected internally through that lobby. And as to the number of rooms, if we're calling this apartment hotels and they're going to be used for hotel purposes, I really do feel there should be at least this minimum of 50% plus one of the units should be apartments. My only concern is that resort tax, and our resort tax laws say that the main use of the building has to be that of a transient. And so I don't buy a building now having 51 or 50 plus one, 50% plus one, then now they won't have to pay resort tax on the units that they're using for hotel purposes. So I would like a little bit more information on that we don't inadvertently, by establishing this minimum here, which I think is a good idea, but we don't inadvertently give them an out to contribute from the resort tax. That's it. No.
So if we'll address those 4 comments, and then we'll continue this to the April 8th meeting.
Let me ask that on. Do you think you'll be ready by April? Is that okay?
Yeah, I think so. If it ends up being stretched, we can just I'll reach out to the sponsor and ask if we can defer to the May meeting.
Okay. That's Commissioner Minor.
Correct.
Are you good, sir?
Yes, that works. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Thank you. All right, Commissioner Minor, we're on a roll. Next item is yours as well. Item 10.
Yeah, thank you,
Discussion
Chair.
regarding the review and approval of certificates of appropriateness.
Yeah, and like the last item, this stems from the issues we've seen in the south of Fifth. And really, I just wanted to, again, examine and have a discussion about the approval process, whether right now it has to either go to the Historic Preservation Board or staff can approve the certificates of appropriateness. Wanted to examine that, and also the public notice requirements and when that is required, because that we heard a lot about that on the project, on the 3 apartment hotel projects down in south of Fifth, that there wasn't, or they felt that they did not have the public notice. So wanted to re-examine it and see if we can do things a little differently, a little better. I'll turn it over to you, Tom.
Okay, as Commissioner Minor indicated, the memo that we've attached to this item provides a summary of the certificate of appropriateness process. And basically, whenever you are proposing either new construction or exterior improvements to any building that is located within a local historic district, and this would also include those areas that would be considered significant public interior spaces like historic lobbies, you're required to get a certificate of appropriateness. And the certificate of appropriateness process is done either at the board level, which is typically new construction or significant demolition or major additions to a property, or at the administrative level for those items that are identified under section 118.563D. And those are typically things like new windows and doors, facade and building restorations pursuant to historic documentation, very small additions that are not visible from the public right of way, and also minor alterations that are required to address building code and life safety requirements. With regard to notice requirements, there are no minimum notice requirements for administrative level certificate of appropriateness issued pursuant to 118.563D. For those certificates of appropriateness issued at the board level, there is a very robust notice requirement. It's a 30-day minimum notice requirement that includes both published notice, mail notice to all property owners within 375 feet, as well as a posting of the property. We did include some illustrations of recently approved certificates of appropriateness that were done administratively, and we welcome any policy directions or recommendations that the committee may have.
Commissioner Weiner, anything?
Yeah, I'm curious to hear if anybody has any comments. I think the public notice one to me certainly stands out. I mean, for example, in 310 Meridian, that was a big issue. Ultimately, we determined that they exceeded the 50% rules, that they had, the work had exceeded the 50% of value of the property. So we issued a stop work order. But until that happened, clearly there was work being done on that property, and there had not been any public notice. So I'd like to see if there's a way that we can have a public notice requirement when even if it doesn't go to the board level.
Mr. Chair, if I may, that would be my one comment as well. I think public notice is the area that I think we've had a bit of a challenge in. And so I guess what I would ask, Tom, what are the options that we have if we want to, if it is the will of the body to enhance public notice, what might we do?
Yeah, but before you answer that, I have the same question because, we've worked on a few things in the past where, whatever happened, whether we were, misled or, they just omitted things. I'm thinking about the pharmacy that was going to open on Lincoln Road, medical marijuana establishments and other things that, they kind of sneak in and then all of a sudden it's up for approval and they start saying, well, we were told that it was okay. In your opinion, how do we get ahead of issues before they become big issues? What might we be able to do, legally or just through the application process to understand what businesses or operations are actually going to open in a particular property, because we do get surprised from time to time, despite our best efforts to get ahead of things. Where can we tighten things up?
So the issue of use is separate and apart from certificate of appropriateness. Certificate of appropriateness review pertains solely to exterior building modifications. It doesn't take into account use. With regard to use, and we've been doing this over the years as proactively as possible, when certain types of uses are identified, the best way to ensure that those types of uses don't either show up or proliferate in certain areas is to try to get a handle on those uses through legislation prior to those uses going in. So for instance, we developed the Art Deco MIMO formula retail commercial overlay a few years ago. One of the items on this agenda actually is to expand the boundaries of that. Those types of proactive pieces of legislation, in our view, are the best way to address that, because if somebody comes in and proposes a use that is otherwise permitted and they don't require any physical modifications to a building, then it's difficult once they go in and they get a CU and a BTR to then regulate that use. The certificates of appropriateness, when they require board approval, sometimes you can address those use issues if they're identified as part of their certificate of appropriateness application. A lot of times, even when they go to the board, all they're proposing to do is a renovation, but they have not identified any tenants for the building yet. So I think looking at different areas of the city proactively in terms of what types of uses should not be permitted probably continues to be the best way to address that as we move forward. And Commissioner Samuel, to your question regarding the notice requirements, there's an item that's going before the City Commission next Wednesday regarding some modifications to the certificate of appropriateness application requirements and appeal process requirements. And these were two recommendations of the IG. This item was recommended by the Planning Board at their meeting in February, and they made some suggestions regarding potential ways to notice the administrative level certificate of appropriateness applications. One of their recommendations was to post the property after each decision was made. Another recommendation they made was to explore whether or not we could include the Energov approvals within the residents' right to know platform. And so those are two suggestions that I think the commission could consider. The one thing to keep in mind about noticing these administrative level certificate of appropriateness applications is that in terms of sheer volume, they're significantly more than board level approvals. On a monthly basis, the board will look at anywhere between 8 to 15 applications on a monthly basis. And those are noticed one time. Each time it's continued, it's not renoticed. We look at thousands of administrative level applications on a yearly basis. And so one of the things we just have to be mindful of is making sure that procedurally we're not slowing up the permitting process or creating undue delays. And so that's one of the things I think that we need to explore as part of that first reading ordinance that's coming before the commission next Wednesday. Obviously, if it's the policy direction of the commission to implement some form of noticing, we can certainly do that. But we just, I think, need to be mindful of the potential impacts on the permitting process.
No delays.
Colleagues, any insights or comments to Tom on how we tighten some of these things up? Commissioner Minor, what would you like to do here?
I'd like to explore with Tom a little more about the potential options for public notices. I mean, I hear what Tom is saying, but I think it sounds like there's a little bit consensus that there needs to be a more robust public notice on some of these issues. And by the way, Commissioner Early, you bring up a great point about these surprises. It's not good for us when we get the surprises. Also, I feel it hurts the good businesses because then we're always thinking, well, we want to make sure we don't get surprised. So I think that was an excellent point, maybe something we should explore further as well.
The only thing I'm curious about, maybe, this a legal issue is, are we creating a right, that some party would have to contest, a flaw or deficiency in the notice, right? So, an applicant's going for, their BTR, what have you. The public notice requirement of the city residents' right to know is somehow flawed. Do we feel that legally now that can be challenged because we, somehow failed to properly provide notice, or the property owner can proceed, and then it's just an issue of, dealing with staff or ourselves as commissioners, that we may have been deficient, but doesn't necessarily mean that someone has to worry that the cities that may or may not be doing their job well.
I think that's a great question, especially with administrative level certificates of appropriateness, which we issue so many of on a yearly basis. I think that if the commission were interested in providing for a posted notice on the property, it really should be in the nature of maybe a courtesy notice, at the applicant's expense, require the applicant to provide proof to city staff, but I would recommend that it be more of a courtesy notice than a hard requirement.
So I would lean in that direction simply because there's always somebody who's going to say, I didn't get notice, right? Despite our best efforts, despite doing everything perfectly, you're always going to have somebody. And I don't want to create, legal issues for us or, unnecessarily, delays because someone says I didn't know, even though we did our best efforts of, mail, email, social media, postings, all that, you still hear people say I didn't know. And I just want to make sure that we're not creating a problem for ourselves, with some of these notice requirements. I see your hand up, Commissioner.
Oh, yeah. So, and I certainly like the idea of possibly a courtesy notice. And my question is, when staff is reviewing a certificate of appropriateness for minor repairs, and other reviews that can be done by staff, does public have any standing? I mean, what standing does the public have at that level when it's at a staff level?
Currently, under section 118.563, affected persons, which would mean property owners within 375 feet, as well as MDPL, and there's some other parties listed as affected persons, do have the right to appeal certain administrative level certificates of appropriateness.
But that's where I'm going. So not during the review process does a standing exist, but it's after the review process, once the determination has been made by staff.
Correct, once the approval is issued.
And that's where perhaps the notice really does matter, not necessarily before, and we're saying a courtesy notice before, letting them know that this is going to be reviewed by staff, but perhaps requiring it afterwards, letting the public know this decision has been made. If you have a concern with it, this is the appeal, the website you can go for an appeal process or something like that. But putting that there so that they know, because at that point, that's when the public has standing, once staff has made that determination. And so I just feel putting the notice first may not really benefit the public as much as putting the notice afterwards that this decision has been made.
And we recently litigated an appeal of a staff level certificate of appropriateness as to 310 Meridian Avenue. And following what was a 5-hour evidentiary hearing before the Board of Adjustment, the board ultimately affirmed the planning director.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good conversation here from my colleagues. Two things. I guess one, procedurally, did I hear this is coming to the body Wednesday? Is that the
It's
next
there's a separate ordinance coming to the body, but it deals with this issue
of notice? So
Yep.
that's really, it sounds like where we're going to take this up. I understand the concerns of, not exposing the city to liability, but I also am concerned that, we make sure that residents do get to know. So I tend to want to do something a little bit stronger. I'm going to sort of wait till Wednesday's conversation to see how that plays out. For example, the idea of a IT solution with the residents' right to know. Some folks might get a lot of emails, but if that's what they want to get, they get them. I do worry of the miss of the developer not doing what they should do, and then the residents don't get that word. So
Right.
I look forward to the conversation on Wednesday.
Wrap this one up.
On this item, Commissioner Minor, would you like to continue this item to either the April or the May meeting so that you and I could discuss this further?
I do, and as Commissioner Samuel said, we're going to obviously discuss this on Wednesday as well.
All right, so
Yes.
we'll show this by acclamation. We'll Commissioner Minor, if it's okay, can we continue this to May 13th just so that we have enough time to discuss it before then?
It's fine with me. I'm not a voting member, but works for me.
Okay, I'll show it as continued to May 13th.
Okay. All right. We still have a few more items to go, colleagues, and a few of them are meaty. I'd like to take one up now, if that's okay with you, which is item number 16, sponsored by Christian Rosen Gonzalez. And this is a proposal from her for our consideration for the full commission, a charter amending Charter Section 1.03C, which is to close what she calls a loophole in the law that allows the transfer of FAR to development projects without the approval of the electorate. I believe she's not with us today. Not sure if we should just wait till she can join us or not, because this is a potential hot button issue. Should we defer this if she's not here to introduce this and tee this up?
I would move to defer it if she's not here. It's her item and it's going to be a long discussion, I think, I would imagine. So I would move to defer it.
I would second that. I think she should explain to us what she's trying to do here.
So we'll defer this to the April 8th meeting.
Yeah, good colleagues, I'm fine with that. Let's just do this though, because I think this came up last time. Can we, as part of that deferral, ask the sponsor for the next time, if be here would be wonderful if that fits her schedule, or if she's not going to be here, does she want us to take it up? Because if she's okay with it, then we take it up.
Yeah.
But let's get that clarity for the next round.
Thank you. All right, I'm just gonna move down the list. Commissioner Fernandez, you're in the hot seat. Item number 17, something that I think all of us feel strongly about, but I think you might feel even stronger because you're talking about criminal penalties for demolition by neglect. So I'd love to hear what you're thinking about here.
Thank you. And of course, this relates to what's happening over at the DeVille. That's why I brought this forward. Is for some people, this maximum of $5,000 a day of violation. It's for some people, if you're rich enough, it's a drop in the bucket, and this is a maximum of $5,000 per day that the state has imposed on us. So even if we want to do more, we can't. And I think following even post Champlain Tower concerns, we need to be very clear to property owners. People's lives depend on the way that they maintain their property. It's not just about the preservation of historic buildings. Is that some people have residents living in buildings that are being neglected, purposefully, unpurposefully, because of money or lack of money. But it comes a point that if you cannot maintain a building and you bring it to such unsafe conditions that it leads to a demolition by neglect, you have exposed people to danger, including even a situation with the DeVille. That let's say that this report is correct, that was submitted, that there's concerns about the integrity of that building. God forbid anything happens with that building and it comes down. The people around there, the people driving by there, the people on the beach walk could be exposed. Their lives could be exposed. And so if someone chooses to neglect their building and it leads to a demolition by neglect, I feel that we should be exploring what options we could have for possible criminal penalties.
There's probably a legal issue. I mean, what is there precedent for criminal penalties for demolition by neglect anywhere in the country? And what authority do we have to criminalize this behavior?
There may be examples outside of Florida. I know that that our authority is limited to imposing no more than a second-degree misdemeanor. So if we adopt a criminal penalty by ordinance, the most we can do is it's a no more than 60 days in jail and a $500 fine is the maximum criminal penalty we can impose just generally. The other thing I would say is that obviously these criminal penalties cannot be applied retroactively. So that's something we should be mindful of in this discussion.
A thought. I mean, there are, in addition to what we can do as a city to a property, if a property is, let's say, abandoned, boarded up, but the property owner is negligent in securing the property and somebody finds their way onto the property and hurts themselves, there's potential for civil liability there.
That's
and
right.
I think there's criminal liability if one is deemed to have been so criminally negligent that the property, for example, fell apart and injured somebody, or they didn't secure it, and heaven forbid somebody walks onto the property, a child or something, and something horrific happens. Would there be criminal liability in that kind of case? I'm just trying to remember from my law school days. I think there is.
we can look at that if it's a really reckless, maybe beyond negligence, but maybe rising to the level of recklessness. Because the first thing that came to mind for me was a private nuisance claim. But maybe if really the lack of care on the property rises to another level, that maybe that could give rise.
Because I tend to remember, if someone's property, if they're so willfully or recklessly negligent in securing it, and somebody hurts themselves, clearly there's significant civil exposure, but there might be criminal. And I'm not sure if that's the case in
We can
Florida.
research that.
To your point, Commissioner Fernandez, is, demolition by neglect, if the property becomes really unsafe structure that it falls apart, and that's clear, criminal liability would be applicable there. But we can explore. But the other thought I had with this is, would we want to create a category where, the opposite of sort of most favored nation status, if somebody owns a property and it's demolition by neglect, or they're so willfully negligent, we put them in a penalty box that they're not allowed to develop in our city or do projects in our city for a period of time. Put the onus that, okay, if you are deemed to be a property owner
Like we debar
that
them.
neglects their property and it's harmful to the city, the penalty to you is you're not going to be able to develop in our city.
And I'm open to that. We're not violating due process for anyone. I don't know if we can legally do that.
I think our strongest position would be as to that particular property, that we restrict them from new applications to, say, expand what they have, or to demolish a contributing building, and then where we may be in not as strong a position is as to a right to develop on other private properties.
The thing is, like in a situation, let's say, someone, we could debar them, but if they, make a profit of $1 billion by letting a property just, be neglected and have to be demolished, they don't have to work for the rest of their lives. They don't need to, they don't need to do another project for the rest of their lives. They don't need to come before us for anything else if they make a big enough profit by letting a property just, rot and demolish.
Yeah. What do we have in city code? 'Cause I don't want to get too far off topic, because this is an excellent point with respect to the property you're talking about. But like in single family neighborhoods where a home, for whatever reason, is abandoned, or a project stops halfway and then just sits there for years and years, and that becomes an eyesore for a neighborhood, becomes unsafe for neighborhood kids or vagrants start occupying the premise. What tools do we have as a city to either go in there and demolish the property so that you eliminate the hazard, or other tools that we have to prevent homes from just sitting vacant and decaying?
The building official has enforcement authority under the building code if a building has fallen into such disrepair that it presents a life safety issue. And we've seen, this has come up before, where the building official has had to issue demolition orders in those circumstances. We also recently adopted an ordinance, Tom, it was part of the vacant property registry, that if a property is vacant or abandoned, we require the property owner to secure the property, I believe, with a fence at the very
Aluminum
least.
picket fencing.
Right.
Yeah, we create a distinction between properties that have an active building permit and properties that don't have an active building permit. So if their building permit lapses and it's just sitting there abandoned, they still have to comply with the vacant property minimum fencing requirements and landscaping requirements. If they do have a permit, then they have to have a construction fence. So we're now requiring that the properties be fully secured. And the ones that don't, they're subject to violation.
And what triggers the action? Is it a complaint, or do we proactively see a property and take action?
Both, mostly complaint driven, but if code compliance, planning, or building sees a property that falls within that, we would take action.
I've seen properties, particularly on North Bay Road. I haven't seen it in a while, but where it's a vacant lot, and the fence is kind of tilted over and the landscaping is just overgrown. I don't live there, so I'm not complaining, but if I was living next to it, I certainly would. And I'm just wondering, why does it sit there for so long looking so dilapidated?
Oftentimes, properties sit in an abandoned state because the owner is in financial trouble. They can't get their contractor to do work. It's an estate, or the property owner just doesn't know when they want to build. But we do have minimum standards that they do have to upkeep those fences. And so anytime a property owner complains, there is an avenue that we can compel a property owner. Sometimes it takes a couple of months because of the enforcement process, but we can compel a property owner to make sure that the property is fully secured so that people can't access it and start creating a hazard.
What do we want to do with this?
Well, it's at the will of this body to pass a recommendation to the city commission or to the attorney's office that we perhaps work on a policy in this spurt.
So I'd like to see us do a little bit more work on this. And Nick, is there any state law? I mean, I assume the second degree misdemeanor you mentioned is part of state law that gives
That's
us,
right.
but is there any state law that would move beyond a local jurisdiction so that could the state bring a case that would be higher than a second degree misdemeanor, or is it just not allowed in anywhere in the state?
I'm not aware of a state crime that would apply here. In the civil fine context, we can impose fines of up to 1,000 for a first offense, up to 5,000, and that's actually part of what we're going in pursuing in the litigation is civil fines for demolition by neglect against the Deauville. But we can look at whether this is an area where we can adopt criminal penalties and bring something back to this committee.
I'd like to see it. I'm interested in the topic about restricting development, but then that may hurt us as well, right? Because we've got something that's been neglected and we want it to be beautiful again. And so then if we do a restriction, that may delay, but we need to maybe be creative and think about how we may do that. Maybe there are additional fees we could assess if something has been neglected and then they want a project on the property. Maybe we can provide additional fees or something. I don't know, but I think we should explore. I like that idea.
Well, and I'm sorry, I neglected to mention that the code now, if a contributing building is demolished without a certificate of appropriateness from the HPB, the presumption is that the building can only be replaced with a building of the same height, massing, and FAR. So we have some restrictions now, but we can look into whether we can go further.
Yeah, it's a complicated issue because a property is never going to be developed unless the finances work, right? And so if you restrict somebody in that way, then the numbers may never work for development, and then and actually the property could lose value. So there has to be a balance. It's like the Deauville. I'm saddened that some of the historical, whether it's the whole property or the historical elements, are preserved. But it seems to me that's a big piece of property, and that if you restrict to just what's there now, I don't know that the numbers would ever work given the value of the land. If I don't know what their intention is, if they want to develop it or sell the land, but if the numbers don't work, then the deal doesn't work. So it seems to me we have to find some sort of balance there. But what we shouldn't do is allow people to control the narrative, like has happened here, with basically just forcing the issue by neglect.
Mr. Chair, if I may, good conversation, and I appreciate the sponsor bringing it forward. I would consider myself sort of a hardliner on this. These are folks taking advantage of the situation in a way that is not helpful to anyone except themselves. So I am supportive of the direction where I think we're heading, to allow the city attorney's office to allow, in conjunction with the administration, to absorb this feedback, take a look at it. I'd also like to be clear when we come back, before you'd get that misdemeanor, which was the initial idea, you probably had some checkpoints along the way. In other words, that's not the first move out of the box, is my assumption. But I'd like to see, how do you get yourself to a position where we're even at that point of consideration? So I think that should be on the table, and I'd like to hear it. Do you all believe you could come back to us at our next meeting with some thoughts?
I was going to suggest with our workload this month that it be May, so we could give it some.
Yeah, that's May is fine with me, colleagues. And if I just may put it out there and just to wrap this up, I'm seeing this from the perspective of public safety, people's lives being put at risk when we have buildings that just have decayed so much. They're living in them, or they're living close to them or around them. And that's the real, the optics through which I'm looking at this from. But thank you, colleagues. I look forward to continuing this in May.
Could I just make one public comment? Daniel Serraldo with Miami Design Preservation League. Well, I was contacted by a reporter like a few weeks ago asking if we had a position, but because it wasn't, detailed out, we didn't say anything yet. But now hearing this proposal, it sounds very interesting as far as a second-degree misdemeanor. And going back to what Commissioner Richardson was saying, unfortunately with the dollars and cents, sometimes the owners have all the money and don't have the sense, even if they have, something that would be viable, they have other reasons for not doing it. Like we're seeing in this case where the owner is proposing casinos in other states with many millions of dollars, but somehow it doesn't work here. So I think one of the challenges is in these very limited situations, what could we do? That maybe an owner will say, well, I don't want to have, misdemeanor. Maybe it won't matter. I don't know, because you never know with these people. But I think it's an interesting thing to study further. But one question I had is, a lot of these are LLCs and there's multiple owners. And so how do you define, who gets a misdemeanor? And so maybe in the future, the attorney's office can review that, that issue.
And that's a good question. I think it would be it could be the principals of the entity that owns the property. It could also be the managers.
It's definitely something that you should look at before you come back, if there are multiple owners, how that would be handled.
Okay. What item? I think it was number 3. I'm going to keep Commissioner Fernandez in the hot seat. So this item is about proposed amendments to our Chapter 118, our land use regulations, to provide when contributing building is demolished without a certificate of appropriateness, the presumption shall be that the building must be replicated if certain criteria are satisfied. So this, I think, is a dovetail to the item we just discussed.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Right now, from my understanding, and perhaps legal can explain this better, is that the Historic Preservation Board has the ability, has the power to require the replacement of a structure demolished by neglect. What we're saying here is that it is the presumption that the building will be replaced to incorporate the same height, the massing, the square footage of the previous structure, and that under certain circumstances, then the HPB has the authority to maybe say, no, it shouldn't happen, or then they can give their input, but making it the presumption that if it is demolished by neglect, that it does have to be replicated. And I don't know if legal, that was a proper explanation.
That's right, and Tom can feel free to add. What we've also done in this ordinance is incorporated the Secretary of Interior's standards for replication. Sort of strengthen the case if the HPB decides to require replication. The staff would analyze the application under the Secretary of Interior's criteria, would strengthen our case on appeal.
Yeah, I would just add that a couple of years ago, we added the presumption clause that is in place now, where the presumption is that the replacement of any contributing building demolished without a certificate of appropriateness or through demolition by neglect could not build more than their current FAR and height. This goes a little bit further by making the presumption a full replication. And I think more importantly, it sets forth very defined standards that we believe will withstand judicial scrutiny. And as Commissioner Fernandez pointed out, it provides for a rebuttal of that presumption by the Historic Preservation Board if certain very specific criteria are addressed where they determine that a full replication would not be in the best interest. And this was also referred to the Historic Preservation Board for discussion, and the Historic Preservation Board will be discussing this next Tuesday.
I have a question, if I could. So what would be the issues if there was a determination that there was a neglect on a property, and rather than that entity redeveloping down the road, if they sold the land, would the restriction be applicable to the new owner, or would there be a reset?
No, it would apply to all successors in interest, because the requirement for the after the fact certificate of appropriateness applies. And if the current owner had the building demolished and then they didn't make a application for an after the fact certificate of appropriateness, the property would be cited and a violation would be issued until that after the fact certificate of appropriateness was made. And even if the property owner sold the property in that intervening period of time, the new owner would be subject to that requirement.
Okay, and then if we pursue someone for neglect, I assume they're going to have all recourse and due process, so they can't claim that, like if they claim that they're not in neglect, and they would have due process to see. One of the things I think is going to be really tricky for us is we need to shut down people abandoning the properties and doing the neglect. But the flip side of it is that it's in the city's best interest to get the property developed, because right now the Deauville's just sitting there and it's a blight on the community. It's an eyesore, right? So it's a balancing. It's tricky because we have to find a way to disincentivize people and almost punish them if they're going to go and play this game of neglect. But at the same time, it's in the best interest of the community to get the property developed so it doesn't sit there. And I don't know that that's going to be easy, because one goal really strike, if we say that you have to rebuild exactly as it is, then someone may say, well, the numbers just don't work for me. And so I'll just let it sit there for the next 20 years with a chain link fence around it. So I don't know what the answer is, but I want us to be able to find an answer, because I would love to, whatever's going to happen at the Deauville, I want it to happen, because I don't want to be 20 years down the road and still see the chain link fence there.
And I just to add to your comments, I think that the HPB board, the Historic Preservation Board, would be empowered to determine on a case-by-case basis whether that replication of the original building would be warranted or would even be good for the city. And I think, and that speaks specifically to your point, that they could consider whether it's actually in the city's best interest at that point to maybe not require the replication and maybe go in a different direction. And that's why I think having that HPB input, it's such a great tool.
Yeah, and maybe it's a partial replication. Maybe it's half the structure. I don't know. I'm just trying to be thinking or outside the box. It's that maybe the numbers work with to replicate exactly what's there, but put an additional structure on the property. But then that speaks to the FAR issue, I think. So, I don't know. We got to find an answer so we don't have properties sit there for another 20 years just abandoned because someone is going to have to rebuild exactly and the finances don't work for them. So they're just going to rub it in our face, basically.
And I would just add
Just-
that, oh, I'm sorry. Go
No,
ahead.
if I may, I am supportive of this direction. And Tom, just to confirm, if I may, from the memo, the administration does recommend and endorse the proposal
Correct.
and that we refer it to the planning board. Is that correct?
Correct.
So I'm going to move that.
And what would that would be, what, just to have the planning board review the draft ordinance?
Yeah, what would need to happen, since this was not a dual referral to the planning board, we would bring it back to the city commission as a C4 item for referral to the planning board as an ordinance amendment.
And do you think that the ordinance is ready, or does it need more work? Because it sounds like we were just talking like on the last item that we need to do more work on that. Is it related?
We're comfortable with the ordinance as drafted. We are going to get some feedback from the Historic Preservation Board next Tuesday, which we will bring to the commission as part of the C4 memo. And certainly if they have any substantive recommendations, we could include those in the referral to the planning board.
And then if it went to the planning board, then whatever the planning board does, it would have to come back to the commission for final anyway, right?
2 readings before the commission.
Yeah, so if that's your motion, I'll second it. I don't have any problem with that.
Thank you, colleagues.
Good job. Moving right along. Almost done. All right, Commissioner Fernandez, keeping you in the hot seat. Number one.
Number one.
So this is, you've got an idea about expanding the Art Deco MIMO commercial character overlay to include Washington Avenue between Fifth and Dade Boulevard, Fifth Street and Dade Boulevard.
Yes.
Also include in that properties from 16th Street to 23rd Street to the east of Washington Avenue, and a dual referral to the planning board. You want to tell us what this is about?
And it's my idea, but Mr. Chairman, hats off to you, because I know that many years ago you started with this, and I think this may actually mirror a little bit of what you were presenting at first. There are a number of nuisance uses that have proliferated through parts of our city. And right now, I'm very disappointed with Washington Avenue. You walk down block after block of Washington Avenue, see, it's a repetition. Every block is check cashing store, convenience store, pharmacy, tattoo studio, t-shirt shop. And it's not in keeping with the vision that I think we all want to take Washington Avenue and this part of our city towards. I think years ago you had recommended that that the Art Deco MIMO overlay include this area of Washington Avenue. At the time, it was amended to remove that portion of Washington Avenue. And so all that I'm doing today is coming here to build upon what you started, to reintroduce into it Washington Avenue, and perhaps take it a little bit further north up to 23rd Street, where we see where the boundary ends along Collins Avenue. When you go north of the boundary towards 23rd Street, then you see again the repeat of the nuisance uses. So I think the community will be well served by doing this and stop this proliferation of uses that just don't contribute anything positive to our community.
Yeah, I mean, I love this, and thank you for doing this. And, you know, it wasn't done previously, although I wanted to see it expanded purely for politics, right? It was one particular colleague who's not here anymore. Just, it was my idea, so he had to vote against it. So putting his political interests over the good of the city. That's the way politics works. But yeah, I mean, it's always troubled me, you know, we live in such a fine city, but you know, the retail experience along this corridor is about as bad as you're going to get anywhere in the county, you know. And I think it's because, you know, once these nuisance businesses take hold, they scare away the good, right? So, right. You know, the bad chases out the good, rather than the other way around. So I think, you know, this kind of legislation helps put a stake in the ground to say, look, if you're going to invest in our city, just know that we're also going to provide you some protection, that you're not going to spend, you know, $5 million opening up a great, you know, retail store or restaurant only to have a vape shop open next to you or a tattoo parlor open up next to you, because who's going to want to make that investment? They'll go to the design district or Wynwood or Coral Gables, you know. And so I think it's important that we think about the city we want in the future versus the one that we have now. And, how do we help encourage investment in our city of the kind that we want? So I'm fully supportive of this stuff. And I encourage my colleagues to think through what else we might be missing from this legislation. And then also other ideas on how do we encourage good investment to come in to chase out the bad.
Well, and eventually, and I don't know how we touch this, but in the future, I think we got to be looking at amortization of some of the non-conforming uses, because what bothers me the most and what frustrates me the most is that for us, for me politically, it's great to bring this forward, but it does nothing unless we get to the point where we start sunsetting some of the non-conforming uses and we give the business owners an opportunity. Okay, you make your return on your investments, so that now then we can bring in the legally the permitted uses for that zoning district. And so eventually that's the route I think we need to go in, really pushing out the non-conforming uses anymore. My biggest frustration, and it just opened my eyes today, that on the corner of Washington and Española Way, there's a surf style. You go then to the corner of Española Way and Collins Avenue, another surf style, and we've become the surf style district, the tattoo studio district, and so we have to make it end. And so I'd appreciate all of your support.
Yeah, I'm curious. I've said this many times. Is how do these businesses stay open and in business? Right. I mean, I've
Never seen anyone
said.
there.
Yeah, I mean, I've often wondered what's really going on behind these businesses. We read about nefarious enterprises masquerading behind business fronts, and I think some of that is definitely going on in our city, whether it's money laundering or other illicit purposes, because there's just no way you can tell me that all of these businesses, despite economic downturns and the pandemic, they're still in business, because we see really good businesses that have major corporations behind them close shop.
Yep.
But these little stores somehow, I've never seen a tarot card reader store ever go out of business anywhere, not just in our city, in any part of the county or any city I've ever been in. I can't imagine how they make ends meet, but they do. And, a list of these other nuisance businesses just don't seem to go away. So I just think we just have to legislate it out.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I'm supportive of this item. I think it was good legislation when we passed. I think it's a good idea to expand. I agree with the chair's point that we should, of course, see if there's more that can be done. But I think for today, this is a step forward. And I'm glad to hear the sponsor talk about the non-conforming businesses, what we do about it. We're about to talk about some of those in just a few minutes in one category, specifically packaged liquor stores. So that was a timely introduction. And with that, I'll move the item.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, we have our first caller of the day on Zoom is Mitch Novick.
All right, Mitch. Good morning.
Thank
Good
you.
afternoon, Mitch.
Hi, Ricky, and members of the commission and committee. I've always argued that the uses you're discussing are a byproduct of the circus zoning within the MXC. Just last night, I was meandering down Ocean Drive or up Ocean Drive, and there are still businesses exploiting the public realm with sexually explicit dance performances and blasting music. And again, it's that zoning which fuels the circus on our streets and has created the perfect business environment for the businesses you're discussing now. Thank you.
All right, Mitch. Thank you. Anybody else? All right, so the item was moved and seconded. Do you have any?
Yeah, no, I'm supportive. I would just say, I like the idea. I would just say, let's be watchful that the types of businesses we're trying to limit don't now move across the street or down the street, right? And that we're just moving them to a new district. And if that happens, then we need to maybe take additional action. So
That's a good point.
but I like it. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, Commissioner Samuelin, let's leap off where we just discussed an item. Let's get Commissioner Fernandez out of the hot seat, get you in. Item number 8. This is
Okay.
your item. I'm sorry, did I mess up? No, I got the wrong one. The liquor store was.
Yeah, if we
which
could
is,
start with 6, please.
Six,
Yeah,
sorry. Number
thank you.
6,
Hap-
discuss amending regulations on hours of operation and prohibited areas for packaged liquor stores.
Our colleague Commissioner Fernandez did a fine job in the hot seat, and I am glad to reoccupy it. It's been a little bit, but happy to take it back up. So we have made some progress on packaged liquor stores. We passed ordinance limiting some locations. And basically what I have teed up here with the support of the administration to at least get the facts on the table are 2 things. One, are there other areas that we could look at limiting either the use or the hours of alcohol? And second, what do we do about these locations which are non-conforming and still problematic? So that was the direct tee up to what Commissioner Fernandez said. So for me, the biggest question on the table, and those are sort of 2 broad topic areas, are what I'd love to hear, Tom, from you or any representatives of the administration. Where are we most feeling the problems? You gave us examples, all CPS2, CD3, south of Collins Canal, and Lake Panco, CD2 between Washington and Collins, RM3, all very good menu of options. But I want to sort of focus, are there particular areas that we think we're having more problems than not?
So the areas that we've come up with for purposes of discussion that we've identified in the analysis in the memo that you just talked about, these came about through discussions with the police department, where they have indicated that while it has been good to prohibit new package stores in the entertainment district and reduce those hours, what they have noticed is that there has been an uptick in surge in business in those package stores outside of that area that can operate until midnight and can open up earlier. So they've suggested to us that it would be a good idea to extend those more limited hours to those areas. In terms of additional areas where these uses could be prohibited, again, those areas would fall in that realm as well. The previous ordinance will limit package stores because that's one of the limited uses. And so we've already expanded those boundaries up to 23rd Street. The other area that we suggested that we could take a look at would be the CPS2 districts between Washington Avenue and Collins Avenue, so that you don't see a proliferation of these types of uses within that area.
Right. And I assume, Tom, if we were to go down that path of limiting new locations and also to limiting the hours, that there are alternatives, right? You know, buying a bottle of something is not a bad thing if it's done appropriately. There are other places to go. Is that accurate?
Yeah, there would be places within the city where you would have extended hours, but you could also say that having hours from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. is enough time during the day to go purchase liquor.
Right. So on that first point, then, if these are those sort of hot zones, if I could use that term, we kicked it off with in the morning, I would be supportive of earlier hours and limiting new locations. So that would be bucket number 1. To go to bucket number 2, Nick, this is, I think, in your shop, you know, we have these non-conforming. Is it fair to say some of the most problematic have been in the new Art Deco Cultural District, the former MXC? Is that where some of the non-conforming problems have been?
Probably. I would want to hear from Tom also on that, as far as which uses are non-conforming, but probably.
The uses that are non-conforming are the ones that were existing in the MXC district prior to the adoption of the ordinance prohibiting those uses. And those have been problematic, but the uses outside the district have been problematic as well. And so I think that if we were going to expand the area where these uses were prohibited, I think the question, Commissioners, is whether or not we could institute some form of amortization or a sunset provision, correct?
Yes, I think that's right. So colleagues, then for the 2 points, 1, I would like to restrict new locations in the areas the administration's identified. I would like earlier hours. And the third part, if my colleagues are supportive of the motion, would be direct the city administration to, the city attorney in conjunction with the city administration to explore the opportunity for amortization to address non-conforming problematic uses.
So, we're having a bigger conversation about alcohol right now, right? In terms of what we're going to do in the city. And, we were hoping to get some guidance from the appellate court, but they punted on whether or not we can make these changes with 4 votes or 5 votes. So let me just say it's my understanding, and Nick, correct me if I'm wrong, that the conditional use and the limited hours for the MXC, it's my understanding that was done with 4 votes. And so one of the things I was very supportive of us appealing that first decision, because I really would like to know if these changes can be made with 4 votes or if it is 5 votes. It's seeming, with the decisions we've had from the court in the last few days, it's seeming more like 5 votes. So I think what I'm hearing is there is a proposal to move the boundary to Washington. Is the first step. Is that right, Tom?
The areas that we've identified for prohibiting package stores are the CPS2 districts, which is basically from 4th to 5th Street, Washington to Alton, and then extending the prohibition boundaries that currently exist in the MXC district all the way to Washington, and then north to Collins Canal.
So on Alton Road, you with this change, you wouldn't be able to buy a bottle of wine after 8 p.m.?
Well, Alton Road, they are, new liquor stores are prohibited now on Alton Road. The second part of Commissioner Samuelin's proposal is that within areas where the package stores are prohibited, non-conforming existing liquor stores would have to close at 8 p.m. now.
So on Alton Road, as I said, I wouldn't be able to buy a bottle of wine after 8 p.m. Is that right?
This would not apply to Alton Road. We could extend it to Alton Road, but as proposed, those more limited hours would not be extending to non-conforming package stores on Alton Road.
So what about, I'm thinking there's a liquor store at the corner of Alton and between Alton and Lenox, right, at 5th Street.
This would apply to that.
So I wouldn't be able to go there after 8 p.m. and buy a bottle of wine.
Correct.
Yeah. And what about other parts of the city? So there are, for example, in North Beach, are we doing anything there?
These do not apply to North Beach.
So I could buy a bottle of wine in North Beach at 9 p.m., but I won't be able to buy a bottle of wine in South Beach at 9 p.m.
Correct.
Okay, well, I'm not going to support that. So I think I kind of like the general concept of expanding the area around Washington Avenue, but I really don't think our community wants to restrict, have that many restrictions in terms of the hours. So I'm happy to hear more about it, and I'm happy to, but I don't understand why I could buy a bottle of wine in North Beach at 9 p.m., but I can't go to Whole Foods at 9 p.m. when I'm doing my grocery shopping and buy a bottle of wine. I guess Whole Foods wouldn't, because that's on Alton.
Correct.
But if I'm wanted to go to Total Wine, which is in the complex at 5th, I couldn't buy a bottle of wine.
And the other thing I would point out is that supermarkets like Whole Foods and Publix, this wouldn't apply to. These would only apply to package stores. So Total Wine is considered a package store because their primary business is the sale of alcoholic beverages for off-premises consumption. But a convenience store or a supermarket, this would not apply to them because they are not considered package stores.
Yeah, so it's sort of like, this sounds a little like spot zoning. I don't think that's the intention at all. But I don't think, I don't want to pick winners and losers in that. I don't want to punish one business over another, really. So I'm having some trouble with that. I do understand, and quite frankly, wish I could further limit what's going on in the MXE, because I really don't like the idea of package stores there. But the truth is now with all the deliveries and everything, you can call a liquor store, right? And get a delivery.
Correct, but we also have an ordinance now that limits delivery times to when the store is open. So if the store has to close at 8 o'clock, deliveries would end at 8 o'clock.
Yeah, no, exactly. But again, that's a winners and losers, because I guess because Whole Foods is not a primary, you could get a delivery from Whole Foods of alcohol, but you can't get it from another liquor store. So that causes me some concern. So I've got some concerns.
Yeah, so the way I feel about it, I mean, I'm somewhere maybe between the two of you. Directionally, I support, and I have supported, prohibiting, further expansion of liquor stores. We don't need more liquor stores in our city, particularly in sort of the MXC district. So I've been supportive of that. I've been supportive of cutting back store hours in the MXC. I've even supported other areas of our city from having more liquor stores. That said, I'm also very cautious about overdoing it. So, I'm going to ask you, Commissioner Samuel, can you help us maybe split the baby, guide us, cut back a little bit so we can get something on the books without being overbroad? Because I think you might have.
If I can,
more
let me
support.
just ask another question, which may guide the conversation. Tom, right now, I think in the MXC, we have conditional use on package stores up to at 8 p.m., right?
No,
No.
you have to, in the MXC, package stores are prohibited. If you were a pre-existing package store, you have to close at 8 o'clock.
Right, that's what I mean. So the existing package stores.
Correct.
Right? So what would, and I guess may be a legal question, but I think that's one of the issues that's contributing to our problems in the area, the package stores. And is there any avenue for the city to just do an outright closure of all package stores in the MXC? What?
Close them out of business?
Yeah, like I'm just asking what the possibility is.
That's the
right?
amortization.
So
I don't know
right.
what's legal. That's what I'm asking.
So we've actually been, the question, Commissioner Salmon raised it at the beginning of the discussion, and this question's come up, and we've actually been working closely with Commissioner Fernandez on looking at amortization of certain uses. I know Commissioner Richardson sponsored a referral on amortization of scooter rentals. So we've done some research in this realm. We believe that after establishing an appropriate record, that the city has the authority to amortize certain non-conforming uses. However, amortization is always subject to challenge. I would anticipate takings claims as well as claims under the Burt J. Harris Act. There is potential significant legal and financial exposure associated with amortization. It's not to say we can't do it. Other jurisdictions have done it with regard to signs, for instance, are a very common subject of amortization. They're also easy to amortize because the amount of the investment is very easy to quantify, and the useful life of the signs is easier to quantify. When we're talking about uses that are maybe higher impact, there is exposure. It's not to say we can't do it, but there's definitely exposure.
So if I could just let me ask another question. So right now, the 8 p.m. restriction is that for just on Ocean Drive, or is that from Collins to the Ocean Drive? What's the area now?
It's the MXC area, and it's basically Collins and Ocean from 5th Street to roughly 16th Street.
Okay. So I would be, if this helps to, because the chair asked you to think about, I'm certainly think Washington should be included in that area, and then even up to north of 16th Street. So I think in the 23rd Street, which is I think the area that Commissioner Fernandez sort of had in his other item. So I would be supportive of that having those same hours that are applicable to Collins and Ocean. It's just, I want to be careful that we're not restricting too much, because I don't think our community wants us to tell them they can't get a bottle of wine after 8 p.m.
I'd be very upset if I can't get a bottle of wine.
And I would be upset if you were upset. So,
Especially at the end of a long commission meeting.
That's right. That's
I mean, the
right.
last meeting we got out at 11, right? So you couldn't get a bottle of wine.
But listen, I'm very supportive of this, and I think maybe another way to look at this is because it's true. Places like Total Wine serve a good purpose for our community, and then we know which are the establishments that feed the addictions of especially vulnerable communities here in Miami Beach, and like the homeless community. And a lot of times those are the liquor stores, the prepackaged liquor stores that are, facing the street at street level activation. Places like Whole Foods, and not Whole Foods, but Total Wine, they're part of a bigger complex. They're not at the street level. And maybe there's some wiggle room that could be done there to maybe address what we're really trying to address and not hurt what we feel is actually good for our community.
You do have, as you're aware, there are minimum distance separation requirements for all liquor stores citywide. And there's no longer an exception to that distance separation requirement. So for instance, at Total Wine, a new package store would need to be at least 1,500 feet in all directions from Total Wine. And there's no ability to get a variance or exception from that anymore. So that's a safeguard citywide to make sure that we don't have a proliferation of package stores in all areas of the city.
Mr. Chair, if I may, to circling back to what you were saying, where I think there may be alignment, and my colleagues will correct me if not, is including Washington as part of the existing framework up until, if I heard you right, Commissioner Richardson, 23rd. That's number one. Number two, I don't sense objection to asking the city attorney to further explore the amortization, the implications of what that is. And then I am happy to take an action to sort of bridge the gap, as the chair indicated. There are 4 areas on the table. What I would do between now and when we hear it, I'll meet with Tom, maybe we'll meet with police, see if there are a couple of those areas that are especially problematic, and bring that back to this body. So that would be the 3 elements I'd like to take, and we would hear it back at committee. Tom, do you think the next meeting is reasonable to get this done by?
I would suggest May, only because if we want to get police's input, this is a kind of a trying month for them. So if it's okay, I would suggest May.
Could you just give me the 4 areas again?
Sure. The 4 geographic areas?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the 4 geographic areas that I will work with the administration, all CPS2, CD3 districts south of.
I don't know all these the numbers.
Tom, do you want to help then?
Sure. The CPS district is the area that is between 4th and 5th Street from Washington Avenue to Alton Road. And then the other area is the CD3 district south of Collins Canal and Lake Pancoast. Then the CD2 districts along Washington Avenue and Collins Avenue from 17th Street to 20th Street. And then the RM3 districts east of Collins Avenue from 16th Street to 21st Street.
Okay, thanks. It sounded, and did that answer your question, Commissioner? And it sounded like, at least on Washington, maybe Collins, Commissioner, if I heard you right, you were okay maybe to go even as high as 23rd? Is that what you were thinking?
Maybe even if you were saying it like Pentecost, is that? Yeah. Which is further north from that?
It's a couple blocks north. It basically gets the entire CD3 area.
That area north of 23rd is so important.
Yeah. So I'm okay there too.
Okay.
And I think even the areas the around 4th and you said between 4th and 5th?
Between 4th and 5th from Washington to Alton.
I'm okay with that area too.
Okay.
And Commissioner Samuelian, if you don't mind, I'd love to work with you on legislation having to do with amortization. I've been speaking a lot about this issue with the city attorney's office, been seeing what other jurisdictions have been doing with other types of uses. Like, for example, in Tallahassee, they they sunsetted gasoline stations, and they gave them 6 months to amortize over there, and they went through their own ruling that was upheld by court. And so if we could work together on that, because I think we're both very interested on this topic, and through the guidance of the city attorney, of course.
Absolutely.
But if you welcome that.
So if I could just sort of regroup, then we'll bring it back in May. Commissioner Richardson, thank you for that feedback. I think we'll incorporate that, Tom, into our discussion of trying to narrow it and tailor it on that. And then Commissioner Fernandez, what I would suggest, once the city attorney has got some information, why don't we do a publicly noticed sunshine? And we would, of course, invite our colleagues if they would want to be part of that, or they could just wait and we'll bring that back in May. So that would be the next steps in the motion, if that's acceptable to my colleagues.
Yeah, I'll second that.
Great.
Nice work there. Okay. Just looking at, well, a couple more items. Item number 2, again, is Commissioner Rosen Gonzalez, or is it now Rosen Matz? I'm not sure if we can
Yes,
call her
congratulations
KRG
to
anymore, or KRM, or KRGM.
I don't know.
We have to ask her about the
KRGM.
Let's
I think we'll stay with
defer.
KRG.
Okay,
I'll
let's
just stay with-
defer item 2, because that's hers, unless one of you want to take it up.
I
I'm not-
can reach out to the sponsor on that item as well.
I'm not familiar with this, or where she wants to go with this, so I think she should introduce it, I guess. So we only have items 8 and 12. Commissioner Salmon, they're both yours. I have a hard stop at about 1:30. So is number 12, can we just bounce that out real quick? I don't know anything about this one.
Let's see. Yeah.
Or
Why
I
don't
should
we,
talking
can we
about 8.
defer? Yeah, why don't we do, my suggestion, Mr. Chair, why don't we do 8, because I think we can get there, and then we'll just defer 12. Is that okay?
Perfect. Let's defer
And then we'll
12.
be done by 1:30,
Yeah.
if
So-
not earlier.
Yeah.
So can I
so
tee up
item
number
8?
8?
Yeah, go ahead.
Good. This is a question that is on the table. There's a new business model out there where basically homes are being purchased by multiple owners, and they form an LLC. And then these homes are then used by the individual owners. We have had such a tough time with short-term rentals, party house, transient. I wanted to start the conversation as to what are the potential implications of this model for Miami Beach? How have other jurisdictions addressed it? And finally, what action might we consider to address? So I'd love to hear from the city administration, legal. Pacasco is just one of the names, but there are multiple models. So Tom, can you kick us off here?
Yeah, and I'll let Nick jump in. Basically, what this model is it's a timeshare. Currently, under the code, there's a prohibition, and their prohibition has been in place since before 2010, so we're okay under state law. There's a prohibition on the short-term rental of single-family homes. However, one of the things that we do not regulate is ownership structure of single-family homes. So you have single-family homes in the city that may be owned by a trust, an estate, religious institutions. However, they can only be operated as a single-family home. This particular business model contemplates multiple owners who would then be living at the home at different times, which is basically the timeshare model. And so it's a fairly new concept, at least as applied to single-family homes in Miami Beach. I don't know that we have any that use this type of ownership model. And I believe, and Nick, correct me if I'm wrong, we would need to do a little bit more research in terms of whether or not we could even regulate ownership framework, correct?
Actually, I don't think we can regulate the ownership of property. Based on our research on as to Picasso, what Picasso facilitates is fractional ownership. It's actually maybe even a little simpler than timeshare as far as the management and maintenance of the property. So what we determined is that Picasso will sell shares as small as 1/8 in individual single family properties, and will facilitate the management and maintenance of those properties as part of their corporate documents. They don't permit short-term rentals as part of the program. It's not to say obviously that couldn't change, and in jurisdictions where short-term rentals are permitted, that would be an issue. But according to their marketing materials, they do not permit short-term rentals. The purpose of the program is that only the owners, the fractional owners of the property are allowed to use the property. So what we concluded is that, you know, even a Picasso property in a single family district in Miami Beach would be prohibited from renting on a short-term basis under our short-term rental ordinance, which is for periods less than 6 months and a day.
Nick, if I could just follow up, it's a new business model. Have we had the chance to explore what other jurisdictions have done? That would sort of be question number one. And let's start there. Do we know, or do we need to do a little research? What are others doing to potentially address this challenge?
We found some regulations outside of Florida addressing timeshares. What we can look at more closely is if state law on timeshares would apply to Picasso, and whether we're restricted from regulating. But we would need a little direction from the committee on, is the committee interested in looking at the ownership model itself, or maybe some of the impacts associated with 8 different parties sharing a property.
I guess for me, I'm interested in both. I just worry right now it's 8, but I wonder if there could be more at some point and how that evolves. And then yes, if by chance we can't really address the ownership model, what about the impacts on our residents, and what do we do about that? So I'm interested in both, to answer your question.
Let me ask. So I had some of the same questions. I remember going to legal, I don't know, 3 or 4 months ago to talk about this when I first saw the model. So, and I think, Nick, you all told me the same thing then, in that you don't believe that we can restrict it. So, and I've also independently looked at the model, and it's my understanding that their agreements with the up to 8 owners prohibit them from doing short-term rentals. And so it would be prohibited under our current rules, but also under their agreements. But I mean, I think it's something we have to watch. It sounds to me like it's not something that local communities can regulate, because it's sort of more of a time share, and it would be no different, I think, than maybe Commissioner Samuelin, if you and I bought a house together and we shared it, and in terms of you living in it part of the time and I lived in it part of the time, that's sort of the model. And we don't have any, I don't even think state law covers that in terms of any restrictions on that. But we do need to look at whether or not there are impacts. I would be interested if we could do a little bit more research on this and see if there, first of all, any states out there, doing anything, any regulatory work related to this, and also whether or not any communities are seeing issues associated with it, so that we might get ahead of it if there's a problem. So that's sort of what I'd like to see.
If I may, obviously, Commissioner Richardson, if you and I did it, we hopefully wouldn't have any trouble at all. But I agree with some of the questions you teed up. And I know this model is at 8, take it to the extreme. Let's say they want to have 50 owners. So once a week, there's a different person there. And so that sounds like a problem, right? I mean,
well, if you'll yield, let me just say, I would think, yes, it's a problem. However, I think timeshares are legal right now. And so we may even have timeshare properties in our city right now where there may be 200 owners or 1,000 owners, right? So let's say if there's a timeshare with 100 units and they sell them a week at a time, that's 520 owners potentially right there. So, I mean, I think we have that right now. And I think that's legal under state law. But I definitely want to watch this.
I have a question for the attorneys.
Sure.
So how is this different from a timeshare?
I think that I think what this is closer to is let's say, up to 8 business partners or friends or relatives going in on a property together. And you see it, you know, with vacation properties. People tend to do this with vacation properties. I know that under state law, we are prohibited from, and the language in the statute is actually discriminating against a timeshare model. So I don't necessarily want to assume that this is a timeshare for purposes of our discussion, but I know that we are restricted as to what we can do on timeshares. Timeshares have some legal protection under state law.
And does the state define timeshare as it being like on a multifamily type of a building, or does it define it, the type of the structure of in which a timeshare exists? Not just a corporate structure of the organization, but does it define that it's, you know, a multifamily building or anything like that?
We can look at that.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I would say what I see it as a form of timeshare. It's just that with a timeshare historically, and I remember, I think they got started, I don't know, 40 years ago, right? The model of a timeshare is it tends to be a much larger complex, right? With
Not a single unit.
so the finances, because that's the way the finances work. So this is, you know, historically, I've never seen a timeshare being a single family home. But the business model, it's, I think, a very similar business model.
Yeah, I think that, if I may, I think that's what makes it a little unique. It's a single family home, which could be in very residential areas. I think the city attorney probably has a sense of it. Can we do this next month? Do you need till May to kick it around a little, Nick?
I think we can probably come back next month. The one thing I'll say with timeshares is usually when you buy in, you have a right to a certain number of days on the property. This is different in that this is fee ownership. So this is the investors or the buyers of the property have a fee interest in the Picasso property.
Let me,
Chair, I think you have, I'm sorry.
let
you
me
just have one.
let me
question
ask
when
a
you-
question to that point. So with a timeshare, the owner of the week is not paying property taxes to the tax collector, right? And so in this case, say I'm a 1/8 owner, do I write a check? Do I write a check to the tax collector, a 1/8 check on the tax bill, or do you know how that's structured?
I think the way it works is that the Picasso drafts the LLC documents for you. And so you probably pay your property taxes to Picasso and then they send one check. But you would be liable.
Raises a question of whether or not that property taxes would be tax deductible in your federal tax return. So I would imagine that they have fixed that in a way that you could, because property taxes can be itemized, whereas a maintenance assessment cannot.
Mhm. And so Picasso owns the property and then they sell the fractions of it?
I don't know how it is at the outset, but when you
Or is it
buy,
like a corporation, like an LLC, and there's just several partners in an LLC, and like, let's say all of us decide to buy a property together and where we form an LLC. Is it that type of structure?
I don't know who buys the property in the first instance, whether it's Picasso and then Picasso brokers it. But I know that ultimately, if you have a fractional ownership in the LLC, it's a fee interest.
Yes, Daniel Serraldo. I just want to mention my parents live on Toledo Island, and recently they sent me a new house across from them that was a nice little single family home was knocked down and a new home was built, like 6 or 7 bedrooms. And now they're selling fractional ownerships. And I think we're going to see this a lot. You know, we had tried to address the McMansions in these neighborhoods and the unit size and all of that. But when you have a 10-bedroom house that needs to pay the city 300 or 400 grand in taxes a year, you know, even wealthy people might want to find ways to, pay that off. So I think it is smart that you're all looking at this, because last thing we would want is single family neighborhoods to become like timeshare neighborhoods. And a lot of timeshares are in complexes and not, with a tiny driveway for 2 cars. So I think it is really important.
Yeah, well, I would offer, if you want us to get a presentation, we could probably get them to come and do a presentation. I know the U.S. Government Affairs Director, because I called to ask some of these questions, and he assured me that short-term rentals were not permitted. So if we wanted to get them to do a presentation, we probably could get them to do that if there's a need for that.
I appreciate the offer. Just in the interest of time, let's move it to the next meeting, colleagues. I'll meet with Nick and Tom in advance of the meeting to see where that research goes. We'll keep that option on the table. And thank you, Mr. Chair, if everyone's okay with that.
Wonderful. Okay, that concludes this meeting. I don't see any more folks from the audience, and we've covered all the items. Thank you, colleagues. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.